I just bought this 2015 Subaru STI at auction, sight unseen, for $3,650. I have no clue if the engine's good, I have no clue if the transmission's good, and I have no clue if the chassis is good. The auction company listed the primary damage as frame damage and the secondary damage as mechanical. They didn't specify whether it ran or drove, and they didn't specify where the frame damage was. I had so many questions about this vehicle, like why was a clean title Subaru STI at auction in the first place, and why did I get it so cheap? Does everybody else know something about this car that I don't? And pulling a Carfax report just brings up more questions than it answers. So let's get this thing up on jack stands so we can start with the good, the bad, and the ugly of my new to me 2015 Subaru WRX STI. Starting with the 4 ugliest parts of this car. I never want to lie to you guys. I have nothing to gain by lying. I want you to see everything I see. I want you to know everything I know. There's only 4 things on this vehicle that would even remotely make me think of frame damage. And I say frame damage in air quotes very, very literally. Starting with the driver's side rear door. Besides this mysterious Audi sticker on a Subaru, we have rust. You can see it's bubbling up through the paint. This should be smooth, just like this section. This bubbling up is rust. And it's really, really bad if we open the door. I can stick my finger in this hole. And we're gonna continue that story on the passenger side rear door. We have the same rust. This one's just a lot better and doesn't have a hole in it. And ugly 3 out of 4 is our trunk. We have the same story. Rust hole, no hole, but rust hole, rust hole. And now let's talk about ugly number 4. The only thing I would remotely consider even close to chassis damage. Our roof line has a little bit of rust as well. Not even on my list of uglies, but let's check out the bottom. Even the underneath of the car is rusty, sure, but anybody who lives in the Rust Belt knows that this is pretty common. This is pretty good. None of this is even soft metal. It's just surface rust. And again, on the driver's side, sure, I mean, it looks ugly, but it's solid all the way back. Sure, the rust is an expensive fix. We have a roof skin, 2 rear doors, and a trunk, but the chassis is fine. It's not gonna fall apart. I personally think whoever inspected this car at the auction yard didn't know that a door is not a part of the frame, therefore there's no frame damage, which also makes me second guess the secondary damage they listed of mechanical. It's all speculation at this point. All we can do going forward is repair what we know is broken. So those are the 4 ugliest parts of the car. Let's go one step up and talk about the bad. And believe me, you're gonna wanna stick around for the good, because the good that I found in this car from the Carfax far outweighs any issue that I've found with this so far. The hood struts don't hold open the hood. The driver's side door panel armrest isn't really attached to the door very well. The center console doesn't really have a latch, it just kind of does whatever it wants. The driver's side seat bolstering itself is fine. We just have some pretty normal wear on the leather itself. I have no clue if you can see this Subaru emblem, and I have no clue if it's normal, but it's really bumpy and wavy. I've never seen that before. I don't know if it melted in the sun or what. Heading back to the engine bay, I see no rust anywhere in here, but let's slow down. We're still talking about bads. The only bad thing I could see up here is our coolant overflow, and our radiator itself is pretty much bone dry. I can't see any coolant in there. Which brings me to the Carfax. I desperately want to tell you about the Carfax. First, let me start by saying this Subaru has 158,000 miles. Another thing that goes on the bad list. A good thing is that the Carfax service history is super full, going all the way back to its first purchase. I think I'm the 5th owner or the 6th owner. Honestly, I forgot. But what I do remember from the Carfax service history is that 150,000 miles, 8,000 miles ago, we have a very in-depth list of services. I have a list of them on my phone because I don't want to miss any, starting from the least cool, we'll say, going down the list to the most cool. At 150,000 miles, we have new transmission fluid, new oil cooler seals, a new thermostat, a new oil pump, a new water pump, a new clutch and flywheel, hold on, it gets better. Timing belt, head gasket, and finally at 150,000 miles, 8,000 miles ago, we have a new OEM short block straight from Subaru. Who would have thought that a Subaru at 150,000 miles would have blown up? That's crazy. Subarus are known to be so reliable. What could have made this boxer engine blow up? So there you have it. The good, the bad, and the ugly. The ugly, there's some rust. The bad, we have no coolant in our radiator, and we have a bunch of good things, including a new OEM short block. Now, honestly, none of that list matters if this car doesn't run or drive. I desperately need you guys to know I have no money left. I have no clue why I bought this car. If we dig into this engine and it doesn't run or drive, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
So the first thing I want to do is a compression test, which we need a good battery for. I don't want to spend 250 bucks on a battery yet, so we're going to steal the one from the Chevelle for now. And there's only a couple things you need to do for a compression test. You need to remove the spark plugs, and you want to disable your fuel, besides of course needing the compression tester itself. I usually choose to pull the fuse or relay that controls the fuel pump to disable fuel, but you could also unplug your injectors as an option. Starting on the driver's side, it's way easier to get to your coil packs and spark plugs if you remove your battery to give you more room to work. Removing spark plugs is usually pretty simple on most cars, but not the easiest job on a Subaru. Now, I know there are a lot worse cars than the Subaru Boxer engine to do spark plugs on, but that's not going to stop me from hating it. There isn't much room down there, and having a good variety of extensions is going to be your friend here. I started this job using the 3/8 ratchet and ended up going down to a 1/4 inch ratchet. Of course, downsizing to a 1/4 inch ratchet gives you more room, but usually less leverage too. So maybe start with a 1/4 inch ratchet, and if the bolts or spark plugs are too tight, you may need to size up to the 3/8 inch ratchet, or just get a longer 1/4 inch. Of course, there's 100 ways to do everything, and it really just depends on what tools you have. Then moving to the right side of the vehicle, to give you more room to work, you should remove the intake. Then it's just like the left side. Unplug and unbolt the coil packs, and remove the spark plugs. And luckily the right side of the engine bay has much more room to work compared to the left side. The left side has what's called a secondary air pump, and its main or only purpose is for emissions on cold start. But the tubing for the secondary air pump goes right over the coil packs, and it really gets in the way. And after a little bit of a struggle, we have the coil packs and spark plugs out.
They all look pretty new. I mean, if you have the engine out 8,000 miles ago, I imagine that these spark plugs are 8,000 miles old. But since we have them out, I'm just gonna replace them anyway. The Boxer engine, one of the worst engines to do spark plugs on. Now, if you want to duke that out in the comments, sure, go ahead. I know that there's some V6s, you gotta take the intake off, but my knuckle is just so red from being pressed against the chassis for 30 minutes trying to hand turn spark plugs. I am just a little salty right now. All right, so the bottom right corner here, 15 amp fuse is for the fuel pump. So our fuel pump is disconnected, so we should be able to connect our battery, put in our compression tester, and test away. Again, I stole this battery from the Chevelle. It is temporary. I will buy a new battery. I don't need an Optima red top for my daily driver here. I don't even know if this is gonna reach, actually. Now we just gotta hope with this battery all crooked like this that I can still get down there for my compression tester. Oh, car's coming to life. I haven't heard the car beep before, so that's a good sign. Okay, and we're starting with cylinder number 2 here. That being said, I don't even know if this engine cranks over yet, so this might be jumping the gun, but let's give her a go. Well, let's try that again. My tester popped off. I did not have it on all the way. Okay, attempt 2. We got, let's see, so 5, 10, 15, 20. So we have 105 PSI on cylinder 2. Not super high, but we're more concerned about consistency than it being high. All right, we're hooked up to cylinder 4 now. All right, consistent please. Oh, it's a little high. It's a little higher It's like what, within 12%? Let's do the math here. So our first cylinder was 105 divided by 120. So yeah, 14%. So we're, as of now, cylinder 2 and cylinder 4 are within 14%. Okay, we're hooked up to cylinder 1 here. Okay, cylinder 1. Nice, 125, okay. So we got a pretty big difference between cylinder 2 and cylinder 1, but at least cylinder 1 and cylinder 4 are pretty close. And last but not least, cylinder 3. Okay, before I look at it, dare I say, engine sounds good. I don't hear any rattling. Oh yeah, 125. Okay, so we only have one cylinder that's lower than the others, and that's cylinder 2. And that makes me super, super happy. Pretty even compression between cylinders 1, 3, and 4. Obviously 2 is like 16, 17, 18% lower than the other 3. I'm not gonna tear apart my engine for that. It sounds healthy, I don't hear any rattling. And according to the service records, the block is only 8,000 miles old. I'd hate to put in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month worth of work and thousands of dollars just because cylinder 1 is 18% lower on compression. Now there is one thing that has still got me a little worried. Sure, the engine compression's good, but our radiator is empty. So I think next up, let's go ahead and pressurize our coolant system, see if we can find a leak. So all we have to do to pressurize our radiator system is to have a pressure tester. Pressure tester comes with a bunch of adapters. This one here fits the Subaru. So we take off our radiator cap, screw on our adapter, and now we just pump until we get to about 20 PSI. All right, so I got it pressurized to around 12 PSI. Any higher than that, and it's just starting to leak out of my cap here. So currently it is 647. So while we wait to see if we have any pressure loss, I'm gonna go ahead and spray soapy wooter, as Chris Fix would say, on all of my coolant hoses. And screw it, I'll just throw them everywhere. And we're just watching all of the soapy wooter hose connection points to see if we see any bubbles, besides of course the bubbles from me spraying. Now I know I'm spraying some vacuum lines and some coolant lines, but the car needs to be cleaned anyway, right? Faster for me to just spray everything and look for our bubbles. And 15 minutes later, and we are still chilling at the same PSI. I sprayed every coolant line I could see on top and on bottom. There was some green coolant residue on some of the bottom hoses, but at 12 PSI and after cleaning it, it didn't come back. So I'm not fully convinced that we don't have a coolant leak, but from my first 15-minute test, I don't see a leak. But the feeling of there being a leak is gonna linger because why is the coolant empty? There's still answers to be had. Honestly, I think there's only one way to continue this video. The auction company said that there's frame damage and mechanical damage, and I don't see either one of those. So I went to the auto parts store and bought everything we need, or at least I think we need, to make this my new daily driver as of tonight. We got a new battery, we have power steering fluid, which is actually ATF or automatic transmission fluid, wiper blades, spark plugs, coolant, oil, and I already had a can of mass airflow sensor cleaner. So my new goal tonight, it is 8:42, is to make this a running and driving car. How did I almost forget to bore scope our cylinders? I already have the spark plug in cylinder 1, sadly. We can still check out cylinder 3. And in the spark plug we go. The top of our piston looks awesome. I mean, you know, a little carbon buildup, but that's fine. We can even use the side camera to check out the cylinder wall. And guys, look at that cross-hatching. That looks like a brand new engine block to me. All right, can't believe I almost forgot to check our bore. Glad we did that. We can continue on with our spark plugs. All right, earlier I said that I hate the Subaru spark plugs, and then I thought to myself, maybe I'm overreacting, but I'm not. I still hate them. I take back the statement that they're the hardest. I'm pretty sure on like some Porsches, you have to take the engine out to do the spark plugs, but this is still 0 out of 10. But we're done, so carrying on. Okay, let's see how this oil looks. It should be pretty good. It looks pretty good on the dipstick. Yeah, definitely due for an oil change, but at least it was full of oil.
Now let's wrap up with these new parts so we can drive this thing. I'm gonna pre-fill our oil filter with great success, I might add, then add the rest of the oil to the engine. I don't have time for funnels at this point. All I want to do is turn this engine on. So again, without a funnel, we fill our power steering fluid. Now we can top off our coolant, filling both the top location and the radiator as well. Definitely in the wrong order. You should fill the radiator first. Now we can get our intake back on after we take off and clean the MAF sensor. The intake bracket was missing a bolt, and that's probably what caused the filter to be so bent up like this. So we'll use a thread chaser to clean up the threads and bolt in the bracket, plug in the MAF sensor, and tighten down the hose clamp. Before we put our battery back in, we can clean up this tray. Now we can tie down the battery and hook up the terminals. Then we can put our fuel pump fuse back in and put the fuse panel cover back on as well. And at this point, we should be ready to start the engine. But if the engine runs, I'm gonna wanna drive it. And I don't wanna drive it with these floor mats, and more importantly, I don't wanna drive it with these god-awful stickers on.
Alright, just kidding, I can't get the inspection stickers off, but at least I got the titty bouncer sticker off and the Audi one. I don't know what's worse. What do you think's worse? Titty bouncer sticky or an Audi sticker? I'm gonna vote the Audi sticker just because the titty bouncer sticker was so subtle. It was black and you could barely see it, but the Audi sticker was bright red, and then it's a Subaru, it's not an Audi. That being said, I've been holding out on you guys long enough. It's time to start the Subaru. Actually, I should say attempt to start. We're going to attempt to start the Subaru. All right, here we go, boys. Oh no! No, dude! Oh no! Well, that's disappointing. All that work and we have rod knock. 8,000 miles on the engine, rod knock. That's what makes a Subaru, huh? How do I keep buying cars with blown up engines? What's wrong with me? We need to pull the engine and disassemble it to see if I can rebuild this short block. If I can save $2,000 and rebuild the short block, it's a no-brainer. I'm gonna do it. And we're actually gonna start pulling our engine by fixing our hood struts, because these ones no longer hold up the hood. The last thing I want is this pry bar in the way while I'm trying to work, and definitely while I'm trying to pull an engine. So I could either take off the hood or just replace the hood struts, which I already have the parts for anyway. And just like that, we no longer need our pry bar. Okay, now we can actually start pulling our engine. I want to start by getting our fluids out. So we're going to be draining both our coolant and our oil. I changed the oil before starting the engine in the last episode, but we want to start with a fresh oil. We're gonna have to use a break-in oil anyway. So drain our oil, drain our coolant. This oil looks so dirty. I just put this in. Literally has 0 miles on it.
Now we can get our radiator out. There's 2 larger hoses, 2 smaller hoses, 1 connector for each fan, and 2 mounts on top, and it just pulls right out. Next up, we can remove the battery. You can definitely start with this, and usually I recommend that, but I just like to get the fluids drained first. Now onto the other side to remove our intake. This will be different for most people. There's a lot of different intakes out there, but mine just has 1 bolt that mounts it to the car, 1 connector that goes to the MAF sensor, and 1 hose clamp. Moving on to the intercooler. There's some hard lines we need to unbolt, 2 bolts that mount it to the engine, 1 on each side. There's also a sound generator that mounts next to the intercooler. That needs to be unbolted and moved aside. Unbolt the blow-off valve, loosen the hose clamp that connects it to the throttle body, and there is 1 more hose clamp that connects the intercooler to the turbo. Then it should just wiggle back, to the side, and then out.
All right, intercooler's out. Let's talk about it. I want to show you guys all of the super cool stuff I find along the way, like high quality repairs. We have a couple high quality repairs on our intercooler. The first one being they didn't have the right size clamp, so there's 2 of them. Next up, if we flip it over, we have the pipe that goes from the turbo to the intercooler, and we have duct tape. It must have had a leak. It's also super sludgy. Hopefully the turbo's okay, but definitely gonna need a new pipe. I'm guessing they duct taped it because it was leaking. In fact, I know it's leaking because a massive amount of sludge on my hand. We have that same sludge right underneath the turbo as well. So that's 5 items currently removed: oil, coolant, intake, battery, and intercooler, and we're 0 for 5 on them. The coolant was empty, we replaced the oil, the intake filter is all bent up and it was missing a bolt. The battery is something I replaced in the last video, and now the 5th one, the intercooler, we need to buy a hose for it. So we've removed 5 items, and all 5 of those items we need to spend money on. Next up, let's get our fuel related lines off here. I have them labeled T, M, and B for top, middle, and bottom. Now I have these fuel line quick disconnects, but they unfortunately do not work with this bracket. So I'm just gonna be using a couple picks. Unfortunately, there's still fuel pressure in here because I didn't bleed it before. So I'm gonna have to do this blind with a towel over it. There we go, got the first one off, second one's off. So looking at our fuel line, you can see inside that shiny yellow piece, there's 2 tabs, 1, 2, they're 180 degrees apart. You just gotta push those tabs out and then the line will pop off.
Next up, we can get our power steering pump and AC compressor out of the way. We don't need to lose any Freon or power steering fluid to do this, which is super nice. We simply unbolt them from the engine and move them to the side with the hoses still connected. So remove the alternator cover, then unbolt the alternator to release the tension and remove the belt. You can also remove the alternator at this point too, but I do that a little later. It may give you more room to access the power steering pump bolts. The front 2 are pretty easy, but the one on the back is surrounded by vacuum lines. What I did is just unbolt some of the mounts holding the vacuum lines in place to give me enough room to get a socket with a long extension down there. Then just set the power steering pump where the intake box usually goes. Now I'm removing the alternator wiring and the alternator as well. Lastly, the AC compressor. We'll start by unbolting the secondary vacuum pump to give us some more room to work. Then I found it easier to unbolt the AC compressor bracket first, then unbolt the AC compressor from the bracket. The thing is, we're going to be using this bracket as our lift point to pull the engine. So after we remove the AC compressor from the bracket, go ahead and bolt it back onto the block for later. Just don't be like me and set the AC compressor on the intake manifold without a towel or something. I ended up scratching the paint doing this.
Okay, so with our power steering off, we don't have to drain that. And with our AC compressor off, we don't have to lose our Freon. And we have a great strong bracket with 3 different bolts to lift the front of the engine on. Over on the driver's side, we can disconnect this main harness here. So you squeeze this back piece and that releases this gray latch. And then on the side, you pry this little tab and pull up. We can disconnect our O2 sensor as well. MAF sensor can go out of the way over there. Now this is probably gonna make a mess, but I'm gonna disconnect the coolant lines that run to the heater core. There we go. All right, next up we got one of the scary parts we got to take off, and that's the downpipe. I say scary because I'm hoping I don't need to get a torch out for these. They look pretty rusted. Oh, easy. I guess it's safe to assume they're all going to come off because apparently this has been out before and recently. So, all right, now we can disconnect the pitch stop. Now we can take off our starter. There's a plug right here. That's your signal to tell the starter to turn. You unplug that, and then there is the power wire here. We're taking off the starter because the bolts that hold the starter are also holding the transmission to the engine. Oh, definitely easier to go out the bottom with the starter. Okay, with the starter out, we got to get the rest of the bell housing bolts. We're getting very close to pulling the engine. Right now I got the jack supporting the transmission. I'm gonna go get the cherry picker and hook that up to the alternator bracket and the intercooler bracket. Both of them have little loops for you to stick a bolt through for your cherry picker chains. I use chains. I guess you could use, some people use ratchet straps. Whatever you decide to use, I like chains. So let's hook up the cherry picker. There's like 4 more bell housing bolts on the bottom, 2 ground wires on the bottom of the engine, and I think that's everything. So we're lifting the front of the engine on the alternator/AC bracket, and we're lifting the back of the engine on the intercooler bracket. Besides making sure your chain is tight so that doesn't come off, you want to make sure that the bolts holding on the brackets are also tight. You want as many threads holding on to the engine as possible. You don't want 3 threads on 1 bolt and then you rip them out and you drop your engine. So that's where I'm lifting the engine. There's currently 6 bolts keeping this engine in. We have 4 bell housing bolts, and 2 engine mount bolts. So not much room for me to do camera work under here with the jack and the hoist in the way, but I can show you through the wheel well. Right above the axle is a bell housing bolt, and that's the same on the other side as well. And bell housing bolt 3 and 4 are on both sides under the axle. So I'm going to get rid of those 4 bell housing bolts. And then if you move forward of the axle, you can see the engine mount stud there. Now technically you can undo the motor mounts and you can undo the bell housing bolts and nothing's going to fall on you. However, I don't like to risk it. So before I undo my motor mounts, before I undo my bell housing bolts, I have the jack under the transmission and I have the engine hoist holding up the engine. So I'm going to undo those 6 bolts that I showed you and pull the engine. All right, I may look a little sweaty and tired, and it's because I just tried to pull this engine for like 30 minutes, but you're seeing this now because I forgot a step. I got the engine and transmission separated like an inch, and then it just stopped and I couldn't do anything to get it any farther. And it's because, like I said, I forgot a step. So currently I have 3 bell housing bolts back in to suck everything back tight, and we need to release the clutch fork. It's gonna be easier for me to show you how to release the clutch fork with the engine out. So now that I didn't forget this step, let me pull this engine and I'll show you what I forgot. Okay, this should be so much easier now that we did things right. Oh my God, it literally came off in one pull because I did it right. 30 minutes of my life, maybe more, because I forgot to disengage the clutch fork. 30 minutes of my time, whatever, but hopefully we didn't damage anything down there. Let's get this the rest of the way out. Now we still want to take our time and be slow and double check everything. Last thing we want to do is cause more damage. Oh, Jesus Christ. Okay, I had a hose stuck on something. I said go slow, I said double check, and I still didn't see that hose. We did it. Engine's out. We're not done yet though. I still want to completely disassemble this. By the way, one person in the last video commented saying engine mounts seem really bad. And yeah, it's because they are. This one's not even attached to the engine anymore. So I guess I'll be ordering some engine mounts. Might as well do some transmission mounts, huh? But before I get ahead of myself and forget again, let me show you what I forgot with the clutch fork. So the STI clutch is a pull type, meaning the clutch fork goes like this and pulls it out to disengage. So this fork was in that throw-up bearing and stopping me from pulling the engine out. So once you remove the starter, there's going to be a plug here. You take out the plug, you thread in an M6 bolt, and you use that bolt that you thread in to pull out this pivot, which then you can lift the clutch fork up and out of the throw-up bearing, thus letting you pull the engine so much easier than I did. All right, next day for me, I'm all cleaned up, rested, ready to tear this engine apart. I realized I didn't really show you guys the engine bay after the engine pull. I was just pretty tired and ready to call it a night, but everything looks pretty good in here. Our frame rails are pretty rust-free on both sides, and I can proudly say that the amount of grease here is probably why it's rust-free. Same thing with our subframe. It looks really solid and very dirty. I'll give this a pretty thorough clean before we put the engine back in, along with maybe some red spray paint to cover up the bare metal spots. It's pretty safe to say that this engine has definitely been in and out a couple times, and I say that just for the amount of bolts that were missing. Like I said, the intake was missing a bolt, the intercooler bracket was missing a bolt, our downpipe here is missing a bolt that mounts it to the transmission. I haven't shown you guys the bumper is missing like 5 bolts, this headlight's missing a bolt. This car has been tampered with its whole life. But the car's in my hands now, so we're gonna fix all of the issues that we can without breaking the bank. We want this to be a daily driver. It's not gonna be a show car, but obviously I don't want my headlight and my bumper falling off while I'm driving. But carrying on, obviously you guys saw me pull the engine. Right now it's just sitting on some wood blocks, but we need to get it on an engine stand. Now I was hoping to just use my workbench since you can't split the block apart when it's on an engine stand anyway, but there's just too much going on before we get to that point. I want an engine stand. So option 1 is we take the B58 block for the Supra off this engine stand and just, you know, put it on the ground, which I'm not super excited about. Option 2 is I just work on it while it's dangling in the sky on our engine hoist and hope that it doesn't fall on me. Or option 3 is I go buy a second engine stand, even though I'll probably never use 2 again after today. And since I really don't want my B58 on the floor, I went and bought this Pittsburgh Harbor Freight one. So let's go ahead and add to the clutter of a shop, and we have another engine stand. Now, I already went to the local hardware store and bought some bolts that I'm going to use to mount the engine to the stand, but let me show you how I decided what bolts to use. You're going to be using the same bolt locations that your transmission or your bell housing bolts do, which means that you're going to be using the same bolt that your bell housing uses. But there's something else you need to account for, and that's the thickness of your actual engine stand mount. See, this is the actual bell housing bolt, and when I stick it through, there's really not too much thread sticking out. Add the fact that I want to use a couple washers to make sure that I have plenty of surface area, then we're looking really too short. But the bell housing bolt does give us the size and the thread pitch, so it's good information to have. The next thing we need is our length. To get our length, I like using a set of calipers. So what you want to do is pick which bolt holes you're going to use. I like to spread it out, so I'm going to go bottom left, top right, and bottom right corner. Now I know this is a really long caliper, but on the end, there's a little point that sticks out, and that'll tell you how deep something is. So if I'm going to use this bolt hole, I can stick my caliper in and slide it till it's tight. And now I know that that hole is 41 millimeters deep. And you want to use that for every hole that you're using to mount. In this case, I know that this is the shortest one, so that's why I showed you that one. Next, you want to measure the engine stand mount itself, and I can see that that is 67. And with those two measurements, 41 and 67, I know that the maximum length of bolt I can use is 108 millimeters. So I could have risked it and bought 110 and a couple washers, but I just bought a 100 millimeter long bolt. And even with the washer on the front and back, we have plenty of length. Now we can jack our engine back up. And I like to take the mount off the stand, bolt it to it, and then make these two back together. Now I'm hoping this is gonna work out with this turbo in the way, and I think it will. Not gonna work with the clutch on. So we're taking the clutch off first. I figured may have been a problem. I just wasn't gonna know until I got the engine stand here. Now when you're doing a clutch, they're under pressure. So you saw I kind of worked all the bolts out a little bit at a time. And now this last bolt is kind of gonna be tight the whole way. And obviously don't drop your clutch as you're taking it off. Oh, just like that. The clutch out of the way, we should be able to bolt this on now. These slots aren't big enough for everything to fit. So I might have to remove these bottom two studs and try to use that. Finally, this is solid in place. All four of these bolts are tight. All four of these bolts are tight. We can get it on the engine stand. We're at the fun part where we're gonna find out if my turbo's good, my heads are good, my block heads are good, my internals, all of it. We need to tear this apart and make a very expensive list of things to order. My goal with this engine teardown is to leave as much assembled as possible. I don't wanna have to remember where every bolt, every hose, and every wire goes. If I could take most of the intake off and it brings the wiring and all of the vacuum lines with it, that's just less for me to remember. That being said, I haven't torn this engine apart ever in my life, so let's go on a journey together. And we're gonna start with this whole vacuum pump assembly. I asked previously if I should delete this. I'm gonna ask again. Let me know in the comments, because it'd be way easier to do the spark plugs without it in the way. Do I gain anything deleting this, or is it more of a hassle than it's worth? And our oil filler neck. Now let's pause for a second. I have 3 bolts that were holding on the oil filler neck and a bracket. I need to remember where these 3 bolts go, so when I'm reassembling this engine, I'm not spending 10 hours just looking for the right bolt. I like to do this a couple ways. I can do option 1, where I put it in a bag and label it oil filler neck. Or I can just put the bolts back in their home and leave them there, and then it's pretty obvious what they're for, and then I don't have to waste a bag. This obviously only works if the bolts aren't gonna get in the way in the future. I wanna keep as much of this organized as possible, and I have 3 hoses here that I can just take off the engine and put on our car, and I'll know where those go. And I can unplug these 2 connectors down here, coil packs. And we're gonna be turning our engine over to make sure everything's in time, so we don't want any compression, or it's gonna make it a lot harder. So we can take out our spark plugs as well. And it looks like the last thing on this side for now is gonna be these 2 hoses. For only having 8,000 miles, this engine is pretty filthy with frothy oil gunk mess. I'm starting to think that the shop that replaced the short block 8,000 miles ago really didn't care too much about the job they do, because this is just the bare minimum work for sure. Probably could have started with this, but let's go ahead and get our chains off. I'm gonna keep the bolt at the exact chain that it was at before, just so I know. With our chain off, we can take off our alternator and AC bracket. Again, putting these bolts right back in so I know exactly where they go. Over on the passenger side now, and I'm gonna start with this O2 sensor. Now, I don't think I did this, but it definitely could have been me. But literally every wire on this O2 sensor is smashed. Having exposed wires, this definitely would not read right. Next up, we can get our coolant expansion tank off. 3 bolts and a hose on top and a hose on bottom. And then same thing as the other side, I want to disconnect all of the wiring down here and these 2 hoses that go to the valve cover. To get these hoses out of the way, gonna get our intercooler bracket off, our coil packs and spark plugs. Now I have no clue if this is gonna work, but I'm gonna try it and then we'll all know if it works or not. I'm gonna try to leave as much attached to this intake as possible, and I'm even gonna try to leave the intake plenum bolted to the TGVs. So if I can unbolt the TGV and all of it comes off at once, I'm gonna be a happy camper. Wiring and vacuum lines. I'm gonna have to disconnect all of them at once if I do this. Probably not gonna work out. I'm gonna loosen the clamp that holds the intake to the turbo. Some more wiring back here. 2 hoses on the throttle body, and then a hose underneath the turbo. I'm gonna show you all of this when I get this off. Don't worry, not leaving you hanging. It'll be easier for you to see what I'm doing when the intake is off, and I can show you all of the stuff I disconnected. I think we have one more hose that's holding this in. Okay, how about now? Look at that. That actually worked out. All right, we took the intake plenum, the TGVs, all of the wiring, and most of the rat nest of vacuum hoses off in one go. Honestly made this way more enjoyable. I don't have to remember where any of that stuff goes. I don't have to remember where any of the bolts go. I still have some vacuum lines and some coolant lines, and I have to remember where all the wires plug in, but I don't have to remember the routing for the wiring. That's awesome. So let me show you around the top of the engine here, show you what hoses I've disconnected, what wires I've disconnected. Then we can take a look at our turbo. So obviously I didn't take off all of the sensors. I unplugged the wires for all of the sensors around here. And then the decision I made for any coolant lines or vacuum lines is if I couldn't easily get to the connector on the block, I took it off the intake. I personally think that'll make reassembly way easier. Now the super exciting part, I get to show you our turbo. I did Google, it is the stock turbo. That being said, I don't think it's very happy. Now I'm gonna be showing you the front of the turbo. Just know that my hand is back here on the exhaust side while I'm up here filming the intake side. Now, our shaft play front to back is really good. I'm actually trying to wiggle it right now and you don't see any front to back shaft play. However, side to side shaft play, it's pretty bad. On journal bearing turbos, you can have quite a decent amount of shaft play, but the fact that this is hitting the housing tells me that we need a rebuild. And yes, I said rebuild. I'm not shooting for high horsepower here, okay? This is daily driver STI. This is intake exhaust tune, maybe 300 horsepower, I don't know. I have other cars that I can do high horsepower stuff on. I just want a cheap, fun daily driver. If I can just do bearings, bolts, and gaskets, and a very thorough clean, and get this back on the road for pretty cheap, I'm gonna be very happy. Unless you guys have some super crazy arguments of why I shouldn't rebuild this turbo and I should buy a new one, I'm most likely just going to rebuild this turbo. And again, when we get to the internals, unless the pistons and rods are completely unusable, I'm going to use the stock ones. Now that I cleared up some expectations of what you guys should expect, let's get back to the disassembly, because for all I know, I get down to the internals and they're all busted, and I do a 180 and now I'm spending $4 grand. We'll find out. Okay, now obviously there's still stuff on top here to take off. Like I think I could take this coolant line off, but like this hunk of metal has a line that goes behind the turbo, and I think this one goes behind the timing cover. So we're gonna flip it over, take off our exhaust, turbo, and our oil pan. That being said, this is going to create quite the mess, and well, I got this down here to try to catch some of it. Oh, it's coming out the back. Okay, what if I tip it the other way? No, it's missing. No. Why isn't it going any farther? Okay, attempt 2. I ended up getting stuck on a bolt over here when I tried to turn it over. All right, now I'm getting stuck on the turbo. Yep. Okay, after you flip your engine over and clean up whatever mess you made, we can take off our exhaust manifold. I'm going to take off our manifold cross pipe here separate from our up pipe and turbo. So I'm gonna do these 6 manifold bolts, 3 on each side, and the 2 up pipe bolts. All right, I'll deal with the up pipe and turbo when we flip it back over, but I wanna take the oil pan and our motor mounts off. Now you wanna give your motor mounts a good shake to make sure that they're good to go back in the car. Like this one, you know, seems okay, but this one, not okay. So we can just zip these on out. And before we do our oil pan, I wanna take off this cooler and the lines that are kind of over the pan here. So starting with our oil filter, and I am throwing away that oil filter, even though it is only 10 seconds old. And I should have definitely took off the oil filter when I was draining the oil, because now I got a mess to clean. All right, now these hose clamps here and here, 10mm bolt here. I'm trying really hard to like these kind of pliers here to get the lines off. It worked well there. Yeah, see, sometimes these work really well. Not a bad tool to have. Let's get our oil pan off. I'm actually taking the dipstick out here. That just had one 10mm bolt there. All right, this is gonna be our first look at our internals. Get this oil pan off. They have a lot of silicone holding this on. I mean, I can see RTV inside the bolt holes here. I'm wondering if they put too much on and it got in the pickup. There we go. Oh my, there's so much metal shavings in this. Our oil pickup has RTV in it. Well, this is not what you want to see in your oil pan. Look at how glittery this oil is. There is so much metal and bearing material in here. This is not a good sign. I mean, there's literally chunks of bearing material on my fingers. There are so many things that could have contributed to this engine blowing up. We have an intake. Who knows if they had a proper tune? There's so much RTV that it's in the pickup tube. Another assumption that I'm gonna make before we get down to our bearings is that they drove on the spun bearing for quite some time. I have never seen that much metal or bearing material in an oil pan before. That is not a good sign. But the only thing we can do is continue on. One thing I can say is our oil pickup isn't snapped like failures that we see. I don't see any cracks on the pickup tube itself. So I don't think the pickup tube itself was a failure, but definitely maybe some gasket in the pickup tube was blocking oil flow. I don't see anything in here that would have clogged. All right, and our baffle revealing our internals, and it definitely looks new in there. Unfortunately, we know the whole story that it's not good. A lot of glitter on the baffle as well, a lot of material. Oh, so much metal in here, Jesus. I mean, you can just see it on my towel here. There's metal shavings and there's bearing material all over. All right, let's finally get our turbo off here. We have 4 lines that connect this turbo to the engine. We have an oil in, an oil out on the bottom, and coolant in and out on the side. So before we unbolt the turbo bracket from the engine, we wanna make sure those 4 lines are disconnected. So when we unbolt the bracket, it comes right off. And now we should be able to lift our turbo off, just like that. And now we can just take off this bracket that's holding our up pipe. That bolt was not even tight. It's always good. That bolt was. I don't know if you guys caught this yet before I took it off, but our heat shield is literally rusted away and you can see the flex pipe underneath. All right, before we continue with the top, there's some coolant lines that go in between the timing cover and the block. So next up, we're gonna work on the front of the engine, get our balancer and all of our timing off. Let's see if the Milwaukee can take out this bolt. All right, no issues, but will the balancer come off? All right, again, no issues. Gonna put our bolt back in. We're gonna need it to turn our engine over and get everything in time. But next up, let's take off our timing cover. Now, I noticed this right when I bought the car, but I figured I'd wait to show you till now. If we take a look at this side timing cover, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 bolts. And if we look at this side, we have 1, 2, and 2.5. That's it. We don't have a third bolt here. Apparently they broke the bolt and they just cut the head off. And at the same time that they cut the bolt off, they put a nice gash in the timing cover. It's pretty obvious that nobody's really cared about this Subaru, but we're finally gonna change the street. Look at that. They even broke this bolt and left it in the cam. A+ for effort though, right? We need to get our engine in time. We have one mark on our crank and that needs to point at this little indent. And then there's a mark on the cam gears that need to point straight up. And if our crank mark is straight up, but the other ones are not, it means you need to turn it another full 360. So this is why we took the spark plugs out, to make this super easy to turn by hand. And I'll show you exactly what I mean here. So our crank gear is in time, but you can see this white mark here is pointing down rather than up. And we have that same mark on this side pointing down rather than up. So I need to go another 360 degrees. Okay, there we go. So crank straight up, and now our cam gears are straight up as well. There's also some markings on the bottom of this one and the top of this one, and they should meet in the middle here. If these markings don't meet up in the middle, it's okay. It's just because these have adjustable cam timing. And now we can finally take off our middle bearings here. We have 3 bearings and a tensioner. Now it's possible that when our timing belt has some slack, that these inner cam phasers rotate. That is okay. Yeah, there you go. You could hear that pop. And we can take off our guard here. There we go. Everything's moving. That's okay. We just wanted our initial timing set. Timing belt is off. Now we can take off our bolt here. And we'll see if this slides off nicely. Very nice. Next up, let's take off our cam gears. So we're going to start by taking off all of the plates covering the middle bolts. All right, and that exposes our scary 4 bolts. These are the 4 bolts that everyone says can be really hard to get off and can very easily strip. Now you're gonna need a way to hold your cam gear. I'm gonna be using the pretty standard Company 23 tool here. And what you do is you have it rest against the crank bolt. So I'm gonna put our crank bolt in until it holds it snugly. And let's try to break this loose here. Oh, nice. That's one. And of course, there's a different tool for the bottom ones. Oh. All right, 2 for 2. Now this one sticks out a little farther, so I got to back the bolt out. Ah, there we go. That's 3. All right, don't let me down. 4 for 4. Yeah, nice. First time using these tools. Couldn't be happier. Obviously, everything went well. Good job, Company 23. Let's get these bolts out the rest of the way. Be nice if this, oh, okay, all right. It's giving me a little trouble, but we got it off. Coming back to our timing belt stuff that they replaced, it looks like they didn't replace the tensioner or this one here, because this thing's caked in rubber. So I'll definitely be getting a new tensioner and one of these new idlers here. Forgive me for getting sidetracked here, but I want to take our oil pump off and see what that looks like. Okay, oil pump off, and we have the same story of the oil pickup. We have chunks of gasket RTV in our oil pump. And besides the extra gasket being in here, in this bottom corner, we had that same story of the oil pickup. We have some bearing material in the oil pump as well. Forgive me for continuing the sidetrack, but I want to see what's inside our oil pump here. So I'll be using this tool here to get inside. If you can't break these by hand, what this tool does is when you hit it, it compresses and actually turns. So you can turn a hammer into a screwdriver to break them loose. And once we broke them all loose with that, we can just take the rest out with the screwdriver. No Loctite on any of these that I see. Okay, and last screw, let's see how bad it's gonna look inside. You know, I actually expected a lot worse. Yeah, no, this oil pump's fine. I don't even see metal shavings in the actual gears. I know that they say to not use any oil components on an engine with a spun bearing, but contrary to every other oil component that I've taken apart, this oil pump looks really good. Looks like there's a couple dimples. I don't know if those are somehow related to a timing mark or not, but I'm not reassembling this for the final time here. I'm just gonna put the cover back on so we don't get anything in there, and I'll revisit this later. Sorry for the sidetrack. Let's continue with taking off the rear timing chain covers, I'll call them. There we go. Now let's go ahead and take off our water pump and this top piece here. These water pump bolts are so loose. All right, well, this hose is ripping anyway. I'm gonna leave that whole set of lines connected to the water pump, and I'll just take it off with the rest of the stuff here. So let's take off this top bracket. I know I've said this a lot, but I'm gonna try to keep everything together as much as possible. So I'm gonna keep most of this coolant stuff together. So I'm gonna take these two pieces off with these coolant pipes here. At least that is my hope. Okay, and then that is this entire coolant system off altogether. Now these bolts I am going to just put in one giant bag and label. And to wrap up the top of the block, I'm gonna take off our knock sensor and the last sensor here. Okay, it came loose, but I accidentally punched the camera stand, so whoops. Okay, the outside of the engine is finally disassembled. We can start taking off our valve covers and our heads. Okay, we have cylinders 2 and 4 here. Let's take off our valve cover and see what it looks like. All right, so far our cam lobes look awesome. Let's go ahead and take off our cam caps so we can inspect those as well. Actually gonna start by getting this line loose from the head so that it comes off with our cam cap here. So far, these surfaces look pretty good as well. Last two to take off our cams. Looking pretty snazzy. This gives us access to our head bolts that we'll need to take off, obviously to take the head off. So you can't take the head off without taking the cams off. And our intake side. That one was tight. You know, they're not perfect. They're a little scored. Now I am not going to take credit for this. Shout out to Schmedia for this idea. So what Schmedia does is writes down where these go, because these are shimmed to be in spec, and if you put them in the wrong spot, they could be out of spec. So I want to get the tops of these nice and clean so that my Sharpie sticks to them. Now when you write on these with the Sharpie, at least it's really easy for the Sharpie to just rub off. So you gotta be careful with that. But the way I'm gonna label these is I'm gonna label what cylinder, and then intake versus exhaust, and then 1 or 2. So it's gonna be cylinder 2, I for intake, and then 1, cylinder 2, intake 2, cylinder 4, intake 1, cylinder 4, intake 2. Now I can just use a magnet to get these out. You could technically leave them in, but we don't want them to fall. Now before we take off this head, let's do the same thing to the other side. So far, same story over here, looking pretty good. I just took this banjo bolt out, and I promise you I did not stick this in there. Just RTV, gasket in the banjo bolt. Guys, I promise you, the amount of RTV I've found in the oil system is one of the major reasons that this blew up. This engine is proof that there is such a thing as too much RTV. If you are smothering every surface, it's going to smush out and get in everything. Okay, same thing on this side. Gonna write on the buckets so I know where they go. Oh shoot, guys, I labeled them wrong. All right, well, I just noticed I labeled the other ones wrong. I labeled them 2-4, but this is 2-4 here. So let me go correct those and then relabel these. On that note, we're finally ready to take off our heads, and it looks like the bolts are actually 12 point. So we got a 14 millimeter 12 point socket, and we got our breaker bar, and we want to loosen these outside in. Normally you tighten stuff inside out, so loosen outside in. All right, let's give her a go, see if this is gonna break off easily. Oh, cake. Okay, now we can zip these out. There is our cylinders. Never mind the oil in them. I'm sure that's just from flipping it over many times. And remember, this is cylinder 2. This is our bum one. And there's our rod knock. Bop, 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 bop. Okay, that came off pretty nicely. Let's go ahead and flip this over. Take our other head off. A little coolant's gonna come out here. All right, same story. Loosen them inside to out. Cylinder 1 and 3's head. Same story. Officially the last thing we're doing before I put this engine on this workbench right here. You can kind of see the legs. I want to make this bottom flat so that it's sitting flat. Now, I know you guys can see this flywheel. I should have mentioned before, I left this on because I didn't know if I would need to use some sort of pry bar in between these teeth to take off our crank bolt. So I left this on. I unfortunately can't take our flywheel off while it's on the engine stand. So I'm gonna put it on the workbench, take it off, and that's really all I can do as a warning to you. You might need the flywheel to hold the crank so you can take it off if you don't have a good enough impact and you need to use a pry bar. In my case, I didn't need it on, but that's a decision you guys are gonna have to make for yourselves. Anyway, the last thing we're gonna do before we take our engine off our engine stand, put it on the workbench, is I need to take 4 of these bolts out so that it sits flush on the table. These 4 bolts here, and this big honker thing here. And now my lovely wife is going to unbolt the engine stand while I hold it, and I'm gonna put it here. Perfect. Ah, it's the wrong way. There we go. It's not as heavy as I thought. All right, shout out to my lovely wife for helping me out there. We got 8 flywheel bolts, and it is a 16 millimeter 12 point. Woo, oily back there. Guys, I forgot to ask, what do you think all this white stuff, all these white specks are around the outside of this flywheel? Okay, now I'm pretty sure we need to take off both of these covers to access our wrist pins for our pistons. Now, I don't know why they use Phillips screws for these again, but I have my trusty hammer screwdriver thing, and it is a lifesaver for not rounding these out. Now, I'll show you in this hole in a second, but let me take this plate off as well. Okay, this other cover. Oh, rounded that one out. That's not good. This job just got extended by 30 minutes. Let's see how hard this is gonna be. Can I get these other ones out even? Oh, that one, wow. These are all super loose. Nice, nice, okay. Well, it was tight, but it came out. Okay, well, at least all the other bolts besides this one came out. Okay, well, I wasn't recording, but I used an air hammer to loosen this bolt very, very carefully. It's not something I quite want to admit, but yeah, I really had to mangle that bolt to get it out. What I'm actually proud of is I didn't actually damage the block. I did get a little gash on the cover itself, so I'll just replace this cover and all the bolts. More importantly, we should be able to take this cover off. Lots of gasket on this All right, now under that cover, there is a plug, and that's the same plug that's on the front as well. So we can take that plug out. Okay, so it's time to get the piston out of the block, and we need to do that before we split the block in half. So what we have to do is look through these holes that we just made. Right now you're seeing cylinder 3's rod. So as I turn the crankshaft, cylinder 3 is at top dead center, and you're looking at the bottom of the rod. And now cylinder 3 is going down, and here comes, boom. That's exactly what you want to see. Right now you're looking at the wrist pin of cylinder 3's piston, but we're going to reach in with some needle nose pliers, and we're going to take out this clip holding in the wrist pin. Now I don't have the Subaru specialty tool to take these wrist pins out, so I will be using this rod and pushing it from the other side rather than pulling it gently. There we go, wrist pin 1 out. Now we can do the same thing to the other side. Take off our clip. Wrist pin number 2. Now I can go ahead and turn around the engine and do the same thing. Oh! And last one. Now with our wrist pins out, the rods are disconnected from the piston heads, which means we can finally break our case in half. You don't need to pull the pistons out. One, I don't know how you would do that. It seems really hard, but since they're disconnected from the rods, they'll just stay in the block as we separate them. So we're starting on the odd half here. We have cylinder 1 and cylinder 3. There's 4 bolts in the coolant jackets here, and there's 2 bolts on the bottom. Once we unbolt those, we can turn it around and take the other half out. So the 6 on this half of the block are all 12.12 mils. And if you have a friend to help you here, it's definitely helpful. All right, I had to lay the block flat so that it wouldn't fall away from me here. Okay, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You need to be very careful with these bolts. I have no clue how you would get these out. If you strip them, take your time, ask for help if you need it. Now we can turn it around and get the other half out. Okay, on this side we only have 2 inside the water jackets. Looks like it just leaves 8 around the outside. All right, that's all of our case bolts out. Now we need to loosen it up. Do not pry on this. You'll ruin your mating surface. Okay, here we go. Split open. Oh, yeah. Oh, God, we did it. We did it, fellas. All right, which one's cylinder 2? This one? Yeah, right there. All right, let's just keep her going right here. Let's get our rods separated here. Okay, here's cylinder 1. Rod itself is fine. Bottom is good. Yeah, a lot of wear on that bearing. We'll look at all of this in a second. We're almost done disassembling. Okay, here's our spun bearing. Here's the front of the crank. There would be cylinder 1. There is cylinder 2. And you can see how the rod is there and the joint of the bearing is there. The joint of the bearing should line up perfectly with the rod itself. And that's literally how it got its name. The bearing spun on the crankshaft separately from the rod. And now that I showed you what a spun bearing looks like, we can take this off. I can actually show you even more. The bearing stuck to the rod and it's not lined up the way it should be. Actually, this is the bottom bearing. This is supposed to be on the bottom side of the rod. And last thing we can do is just push our pistons out. And to remove our crankshaft bearings, all you gotta do is just push them around and pull them off. And finally, our beautifully organized EJ257. Isn't it crazy that an engine is just pieces of metal inside of bigger pieces of metal, and then we mix some air and gasoline, set it on fire, and it makes even bigger pieces of metal move forward. Pretty crazy when you think about it. Putting that aside, it's time to go through our internals and figure out, is this engine rebuildable? Am I out an entire engine? I mean, we already know that I gotta rebuild my turbo or upgrade options. And if we're upgrading our turbo, maybe we should upgrade our internals at the same time. Or, hear me out, we spend $600 on an engine rebuild and we spend less than $100 on a turbo rebuild, and I get this back on the road for less than $1,000. All of those decisions might be made for me based on how bad everything really is. Moving left to right, we have cylinder 1 and cylinder 3 and the intake and exhaust camshaft next to the head for that side as well. The camshafts look fantastic, zero issues with those at all. However, the surfaces that they ride on look a little gross, and that's the same situation on the head. It looks pretty rough. Cylinder 1 and 3 pistons and rods themselves look fine, but obviously the bearings do not. Cylinder 1 rod bearings are not happy at all. We wore through the bearing material and we were riding metal to metal. Not very good for engine wear. Cylinder 3 is a little bit of a different story. We didn't wear through the bearing material, but obviously you wouldn't reuse these. Which brings us to our crankshaft and the main bearings. The main bearings themselves are fine, but they're worn, and again, just like the rod bearings, you would not reuse these. And finally, the super fun part, we have cylinder 2. You can see the bearing material on cylinder 2 is completely gone all the way around. And here's that spun bearing for cylinder 2. You can see it's obviously not lined up, and it's literally welded itself to the rod. I tried pulling this off with pliers very, very hard. It's the bearing was just going to snap before it came off the rod. So if everything else is good, we at minimum have one rod we need to purchase. Nothing different about cylinder 4 compared to 1 and 3. We just need to replace the rod bearings. And again, just to show you a different piston, they look like they have 8,000 miles. And then of course the intake and exhaust camshaft for cylinders 2 and 4 and the head. Everything looks great here, similar story. It looks a little rough, but the bearing surfaces are a-okay. So I think the last thing we need to talk about is our case halves. Coming back around to the other side of the table, everything looks great on the inside of these blocks. I love what I'm seeing here on both of these. They look awesome. Flipping them around so we can look at the cylinder walls. Here is cylinder 1, looking amazing. And 4, skipping cylinder 2, straight to number 4. It also looks awesome all the way around. Super happy to see that. Now the ultimate question, cylinder 2, we spun the rod bearing on that one. How does it look? It looks a little worse for wear compared to the other ones. You can see right in the middle here, that is where our piston was banging around side to side and scraped up the cylinder walls. But it is perfectly smooth. Nothing catches on my fingernail. If anything, that would come out very easily with a hone job. It's finally time that we build my EJ for my 2015 STI. And believe it or not, the machine shop gave me this baggie here of even more rubber that they found in the oil galleys of the heads and block. So I'm not sure how all of that happened. I'm gonna blame it on negligence of the previous shop that did the build, but it's in our hands now, and look at all of these beautiful parts. Just in the engine parts alone, we have a new rod bearings, new main bearings, new crankshaft, and everything else has been gone through thoroughly by the machine shop. We have tons of new upgrades like a Killer Bee oil pickup, an IAG air oil separator, new timing components, the list goes on. So in this episode, we're gonna walk through building the entire long block, and we're even gonna rebuild my turbo because that thing has seen better days. So it's finally time. Let's get on to step 1, which is we got to make sure all of our bearing clearances are right. So there are 2 sets of bearing clearances that we need to measure. The first set that I'm going to measure is our rod bearing clearance. For our rod bearing clearances, I'm going to be shooting for 15 to 18 thousandths, and I'm just going to be using Plastigauge to check those clearances. So the first step of checking your bearing clearances is make sure all of the surfaces are super clean. You don't want any debris or any oil on your surfaces when you're checking. Some other things to note is that you should keep your rods together. They are labeled. For instance, this one says BSJ, SJ6, and these second 2 letters match, SJ and SJ. Another thing to note is when you disassemble your engine, keep your old rod bolts and your old case bolts and use those to check your clearances, as they are torque to yield one-time use only, so you don't want to use your new bolts when you're just checking your clearances. And just make sure when you're putting your bearings in that you line this tang up with the little indent on your rod itself. Once you have your surfaces cleaned and your bearings installed on your rod, go ahead and set your plastic gauge up like this. Now it's important when you're doing this, you don't want anything to rotate because you'll smear the plastic gauge and ruin your reading. So I'm gonna have the top of my rod resting against the table so it doesn't rotate on me, and slide the bottom into place. Now it's probably a good idea to check these one at a time so I don't rotate this one accidentally while putting the other ones on. And the torque spec for this is 38 foot-pounds. Again, make sure you're using the old bolts if you have them. They are torque to yield. So after you got them torqued, again, be careful not to spin them and loosen the bolts. So there's our plastic gauge. Now all we have to do to measure it is find what section closely matches it, and you can see that it's pretty much dead on the 15 thousandths. And if you remember, I said we wanted to be at 15 to 18 thousandths, which means we're in spec. So 12 to 15 thousandths for the main clearances, 15 to 18 for the rod clearances. That's what I'm going with. You might be told something different by your engine builder, your machine shop, or your bearing manufacturer, or Subaru. Everyone's got a different opinion. Usually the manufacturers want tighter bearing clearances because they want to run thinner oils. The thinner oil will mean the engine is more efficient, and being efficient is very important to manufacturers. The actual bearing clearance that you're going to want is totally different for everybody's situation, depending on what you're doing, whether it's a street car, race car, track car. Just do your own research, call your engine builders, call your machine shop, and see what's recommended for your engine and what you're trying to do with it. So let me quick do that 3 more times for the other connecting rods, and I'll show you the results. All right, we're all good to go with our connecting rod bearing clearances. They were all pretty much dead even at 15 thousandths. Now, of course, you don't want that plastic gauge on there when you're actually assembling the engine, so I'll just wipe it off before I forget. And now finally, the last clearance that we need to check before we assemble this thing. I'm getting super antsy. All I've ever wanted was to drive this car. So again, we clean all of our surfaces. There's 3 different size main bearings for this engine. The 2 biggest ones go in the back. The smaller ones go on 2 and 4. And the middle-sized ones go on 1 and 3. Again, making sure that there's no oil or debris when you're checking these clearances. Now we can put our crankshaft on either side. And now it's plastic gauge time. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spots that we need to put plastic gauge on before we put our other case half on and torque it down. We got plastic gauge on all 5 lobes. We can nicely put our other case half on. Make sure you're on the dowels first and then seat it with a mallet. Now, same thing as the rod bolts here. We want to be using the old ones because they are torque to yield. So this first torque is 8 foot-pounds. Well, it's like 7.5 technically. All right, now that we have 4 bolts holding this together, we don't have to worry too much about it separating or moving. We can just lay it flat. So then we can come to the other side, and again, 7.5 foot-pounds on this side. Torque sequence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And do the same torque sequence, but to 14 foot-pounds. Flip it around for the final torque sequence. The inside bolts go 90 degrees. These outside ones get 30 foot-pounds. And finally, these get 90 degrees as well. Okay, and this is the case halves torque. But now we're gonna take the bolts out and check our main bearing clearances. Okay, case bolts are loose. Let's see what we got. First glances, they are definitely tighter than the rod bearings, which is what we wanted. These are all within spec. Super happy with where these are. We're getting so close to putting this engine together, I can almost taste it. So let's go ahead and start with the piston ring gap. One thing I want to mention before we keep going is sometimes your piston heads need to go in a certain cylinder. The way you can check that is if we go to the top of the block, you'll see BB and BB. Those are your bore sizes, and if we look at the top of the piston, you'll see B, 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 B. So in my case, I'm lucky that all 4 cylinders are the same size, they're all Bs, and all 4 of my pistons are the same size, they're all Bs. But it's possible that you have a different combination. Maybe you have ABAB or AABB. Just make sure if this says B, it goes into a cylinder that says B. So let's quick talk about our piston rings. We have our first layer. This is the compression ring. The second layer is the oil scraper ring. And both of these are our third layer, and those are the oil control rings. Those go in these 3 sections here. Again, top to bottom, we got compression, oil scraper, and oil control. Another thing I'll mention before I forget is pistons are directional. You'll see that these pistons have a little divot, and that divot needs to face the front of the engine when you put them in. All right, so back to the rings and the ring gap. As far as I'm aware, the third set of rings, you don't really need to check the gap. Those are going to be fine. That same thinking can technically be applied to your first and second ones. These are usually pre-gapped as long as you buy factory ones. However, it's good to double check them, along with the fact that Subaru has a really tight end gap clearance from the factory and you might want to widen it. From what I read online, Subaru wants you to be at 9 to 11 thousandths, whereas if you look at piston ring manufacturers, they want you to be at like 20 to 22 thousandths. So Subaru wants you at 10 thousandths and piston ring manufacturers want you at 20 thousandths. We are actually going to go right in the middle. Piston ring manufacturers want you to be super safe so that the piston rings don't fail. Subaru wants you to be super tight so the engine's more efficient. We're going to meet them in the middle. And for our first layer, we're going to be targeting 15 thousandths. And for our second ring, we're going to be targeting 18 thousandths. The tools that I will be using for this are a piston ring installer, feeler gauges, and an end gap grinder, piston ring grinder, whatever you want to call it. This is to check our clearance. This is to make the clearance bigger. And this tool is to install them on the piston. So really there's only 3 steps to get your piston ring clearance correctly. The first step is to get your piston actually in the cylinder, and you want to lube up your cylinder wall along with your piston ring. That way when you put your piston ring in, you don't scratch anything. So you lube it up, you get your piston ring started, and you want to make sure that your piston ring is perfectly flat and perfectly aligned. That way when you measure your gap, it's actually accurate. You can buy a special tool to do this, or most people just use the piston itself. So once you got your ring started, go ahead and slide your piston down until it's level. Take your piston out. Now use your feeler gauge to figure out what your end gap is. In my case, I'm at 13 thousandths. And like I mentioned, for the top piston ring, we want to be at 15 thousandths. So really we're not too far off. So that was steps 1 and 2. Step 1 is seat the piston ring properly. Step 2 is measure your current gap. And step 3 is to grind a little bit of your piston ring. Now you don't want to chip your piston ring off, you want to slowly grind it. So light pressure, make sure the surface is flat against it. And after just a little bit of grinding, you want to remeasure it. If you grind off too much material, you cannot add it back. So grind a little bit, remeasure, grind a little bit, remeasure. Put the piston ring back in its home. Seat it with the piston and go ahead and remeasure. In this case, the 14 fits. Oh, and so does the 15. So after just that little bit of grinding, our 15 millimeter fits now. So actually I said there was only 3 steps, but there is 4. Once you are done grinding your piston ring, you want to use a little bit of sandpaper or a file and make sure you deburr the side that you grinded. Another thing to note is you only want to grind one side. Don't switch side to side, just stick with one. So that is the top ring for cylinder 2 complete. Now that I know that this ring has the right gap for cylinder 2, it is only going to be for cylinder 2. So I'm going to put this aside and we can move on to our second ring, the oil scraper. Again, make sure your cylinder wall is lubed and your piston ring's lubed. Insert the piston ring, seat it with the piston, and now measure your clearance. Again, for my engine, I went with 15 thousandths for the top, and we're going with 18 thousandths for the second one. So 18 already fits for our second ring. Don't have to do any grinding on that, which means we're ready to assemble our cylinder 2 piston. So these oil control rings are pretty easy to separate by hand, no need for the installer. And these are going again on the bottom like so. So you're gonna have 2 of the small ones on the bottom and then the springy one here. With this springy looking one, you want the tabs on the end there to be facing up. So again, with those tabs facing up, go ahead and slide this in. And you want that wavy one in the middle. Okay, and that is our oil control rings all set up. Next up, we're going with the oil scraper ring. Rule of thumb is just to have the text facing up. So for these bigger ones, I like to use the oil installers, spread them out only as much as you need to, and get it into its new home. So that is our oil scraper ring in the second one. And next up is our compression ring. This one goes on top, hence why I did it last. Okay, this is cylinder 2 piston almost set up. And the last thing we have to do for the rings on this is make sure that the compression ring and the oil scraper ring, the gaps are 180 degrees from each other. So now the oil scraper ring's there, and on the complete other side is our compression ring. So I'm just gonna go ahead, put a little masking tape on here and label it cylinder 2, and we're ready to move on. And now I gotta do that 3 more times because it's 4-cylinder. So I won't make you watch me do the other ones. You get the point. Seat it evenly, measure it, grind it, put it on the piston, and you're done. So with our rod and our main bearing clearances checked and in spec, it's time to finally start assembling this engine. The first thing we're gonna do is get all 4 of our connecting rods bolted and torqued to our crankshaft. I'm gonna be using assembly lube instead of engine oil. Engine oil is okay. This is just a little better. So get all of our surfaces coated. I like to coat the bearing as well. I am always very generous with the amount I use. There's no need to be stingy here. The last thing you want is to ruin your engine on the first start. You want to ruin it on like the 3rd or the 2nd start. Now your connecting rods have a mark on them, and that needs to face the front of the engine. Another thing I'm going to be using here is fastener assembly lube. Just like the assembly lube and the fastener assembly lube, you can just technically use engine oil for these, but I will be using a little bit of an upgrade here. Now you could probably argue that I shouldn't be using ARP assembly lube here, and I should be just using motor oil like the instructions call for, and feel free to debate that in the comments. I really do like when the comments are full of knowledge. I think we can all help each other become better mechanics. Now I'm actually going to be lubing the top of the connecting rods as well. It'll be a lot harder to lube these when they're in the engine block. So again, marking facing forward, making sure we have the right end cap for each connecting rod. They are doweled, so you can't really put them on the wrong way as long as you have the matching number. Lube up your threads. I should mention the point of lubing your threads is so that you get an accurate torque reading. That way when you're actually torquing, you're not fighting friction. Again, the torque spec for this is 38 foot-pounds. All right, and that is our connecting rods torqued to our crankshaft. Everything spins super nicely. So far we are good to go. All right, it's time to bolt our case halves together, but obviously we have some things we need to do first. The first thing we need to do is we have 4 O-rings, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3 of them are these flat blacked like double ribbed things. Never seen them before, but those 3 black ribbed ones go here, and then the bigger orange one goes on the bigger hole. Who would have guessed? Now I like to always lube up my O-rings before I put them in place. So I get some oil on my fingers, rub it around the O-ring, and place it in its new home, and do that for all of them. Next up, we want to get assembly lube on all of our bearing surfaces. Assembly lube or oil, whatever you are choosing, just something so it's protected. Also lubing up the sides of the thrust bearing, and quickly off camera, I'm going to lube up the crank and the other case half. Now the part that I've been dreading is actually putting gasket on this block here. There's no gasket from Subaru that you can just put in place. You have to use RTV and make your own. Now I'm just using the service manual, and it shows you the exact path. I'll quick explain the exact path, and then obviously I'll put the RTV on and you'll be able to see it then. But we're gonna go around this bolt. We're gonna start in this corner, go around the O-ring, go above this hole that the dowel goes in, around the bolt, around the bolt, around this bolt, down and over. In this section, we go from corner to corner, but going around the dowel on the inside. And then we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 bolt holes for your main cap or your case half, and you have to make a circle around each one of these. So the fun part, let's get started. I'm not very experienced at laying a smooth bead of RTV, but we're gonna do our best. I'm gonna do the bolt holes last. Your bead doesn't need to be too thick, but it's important that you don't have any thin spots where it's not gonna seal properly. And you are kind of on a time limit here. Obviously you can't start the RTV bead and then come back an hour later. It might not seal correctly. Okay, for some reason I feel like that was one of the most intense things I've ever done. All right, no time for dilly-dally. We got our gasket in place. We just gotta lower our crank into position, being careful not to get any of that RTV on the crank.
Now, my microphone died here for some reason, but I'll keep us going with a voiceover for a second. With your RTV all set up, you can lower the other case half down, making sure the rods go into the cylinders, and tap it all together gently with a mallet. Now I'm cleaning up any RTV that's squished out just to make sure everything is nice and clean, And now break out those new case bolts and make sure you're putting the sealing washers on the bolts that go in the water jackets. Snug them up and torque them down to 7.5 foot-pounds.
And again, we got 4 long bolts with seal washers and 2 long bolts without them. And now we're doing 13.5 foot-pounds or 160 inch-pounds. And on the other side too. And the last time, 90 degrees for the big ones, 30 foot-pounds for the shorter ones. And on the other side again, these are all 90 degrees. And that is our case halves torqued together. I'm gonna do another quick wipe down of any RTV that's coming out. Now that the big major case bolts are tight, we have some smaller ones to go around the edge. And of course, these have a torque sequence as well. All right, now follow me with the torque sequence, and we're going to 18 foot-pounds. Then you're supposed to tighten the one in the back here, except for I have no clue how you're supposed to get a torque wrench on this. All of my torque wrenches are way too big to fit in this little pocket. Torque it by feel. And then we can finish it off with this top right corner. Just kidding, we can't forget the little baby one on the bottom. All right, moving to the back side of the engine, we can install our rear main seal. Just like every other seal, you wanna get it lubed up first. And I'll be using a Company 23 tool to install this. We just gotta get it a little bit started and thread our bolts in. And we just wanna tighten these bolts evenly. So just work our way around a little bit at a time. We're in no rush. You can absolutely do this without the tool. The tool just makes it so much easier. And once the tool bottoms out against the block, you can remove it. And you have a perfectly installed rear main seal. Next up, we can get our pistons installed. Now, normally on like an inline or a V engine, you have your connecting rod and your piston assembled before it's bolted to the crank. However, that's not an option on a flat engine. You have to bolt your rod to the crank first, and then you have to get the wrist pin through the piston and the rod second. Okay, I practiced on cylinder 2 here, so I'm gonna show you on cylinder 4. First thing we wanna do is make sure the cylinder wall, again, nice and lubed up along with the skirts of our piston. And then we're just gonna double check that the first and second piston rings are 180 degrees apart. Make sure that the clip that holds the wrist pin in is on in the center. It's really hard to get the pistons out. Once they're in, I'm pretty sure you gotta take it apart. So you really wanna make sure that that's in before you go too far. All right, now that our piston is in the block, for cylinder 4, we're gonna look through the hole in the back of the block, and we're gonna keep on tapping the piston down until we see it through that hole. Now you can reach up through the bottom and make sure that the connecting rod is in the piston. This is also how you're gonna hold the connecting rod in position for you to push your wrist pin through. So next thing you need to do is line up these 2 holes. So it looks like I need to go a little bit deeper with my piston. Or you can always try turning your crank as well. So once those 2 holes are lined up, you can lube up your wrist pin and slide her on in. And I'm just using a socket to get it in all the way. Then you just get your clip on the other side. That's cylinders 2 and 4. I'm gonna repeat the process for 1 and 3, and I'll be back in a second. And that is basically our short block complete. There are some holes that we need to plug still, but as of now, you have a complete short block rotating assembly. So again, spinning nicely, doesn't require a lot of force. Just basically the weight of my arm, maybe not that light, but very light pressure. This thing rotates nicely. So let's keep the train rolling. Like I said, we have some holes to plug. These 4 right here plug the holes that we put our wrist pins in. This one is our oil pressure sensor. We have some miscellaneous plugs. Actually, 2 of them are bolts, but they act as plugs. And then we have the big cover for this big back section here. Now this one's the easiest. It just has an O-ring, no thread locker, no thread sealant. These 5 plugs and these 2 bolts need thread sealant, along with the 3 big plugs and the oil pressure sensor. For the back plate, you need RTV around the outside, along with one of the bolts. The black one needs thread locker. So again, these big ones for the wrist pin holes have a washer, and we need thread sealant. So for thread sealant, I'm just gonna put a couple blobs on, And love it or hate it, I'm gonna just spread it out with a brush. And then we can just thread her in. And we have 2 smaller ones up top. I don't have a torque spec for these top ones, so tight is tight. However, the torque spec for the big ones is 50 foot-pounds. For the top of the block, we have 2 plugs, 2 bolts, and this is our oil pressure sensor. The oil pressure sensor has a washer, and I'm going to thread seal it as well. And again, for these, I don't have a torque spec, I'm sorry. For these, I'm just going tight is tight. And that's the top of the engine done for those plugs and bolts. And lastly, the back, we have 2 plugs, one for the wrist pin, one for this hole. We have this plate with an O-ring for here, and then this big plate that needs RTV around it for this part here. Now these screws look like Phillips, but they're actually JIS or JIS bits, so I special ordered one of these bits just for this. Make sure you got your O-ring on, and I like to put a little bit of oil on our O-rings before installing them. And this back plate is 5 foot-pounds, or I'm gonna do 60 inch-pounds. And that's it. Seems really light. And we got the plug on top here, and we're going with tight is tight for this one. And last big plug here, this one I do have a torque for, 50 foot-pounds. And to RTV this plate, there's just a nice groove that you can follow all the way around. And remember, this back plate has 1 black screw, or bolt I guess, and that one gets, oh Jesus, I put way too much on. Whoops. And that one gets Loctite. You know, probably not this much, it kind of just, it happens to the best of us. And I want to get a couple screws started before I press this into place, so I make sure it's lined up properly. Just make sure that this top left one gets the black screw with the Loctite. The plate has an arrow pointing to it to remind you. But now that I got a couple screws in, go ahead and just tighten them by hand. And now it's lined up and I can get the rest of them on. And these get the same 5 foot-pounds or 60 inch-pounds. And I like to tighten them from the middle out. Probably doesn't matter too much because Subaru doesn't specify. All right, next up, let's get our oil pump on. There is one thing we're gonna do before we put the oil pump on, and we're gonna take these screws out one at a time, thread lock them, and put them back in. There are horror stories online of these screws backing out, and then you lose oil pressure, and then you lose your engine. So we're gonna be safe, and we're gonna take the screws out, thread lock them. Again, using a JIS screw bit. Make sure you're pushing down with a lot of force here. The last thing you wanna do is strip these screws out. But as you can see, this screw is bare, no sealant, no thread locker from factory. Now you don't need any sealant, but we do want some thread locker. You could use red thread locker if you want. I'm just gonna use blue. And again, for the life of me, I could not find a torque spec for this, so tight is tight. And I'm starting at the bottom right here. There's only 5, so I have 4 more to go. And I'm just doing one at a time, that way I don't lose any of the positioning on the inside. Don't have to worry about anything if you just do one at a time. We seal the oil pump with 1 O-ring down here and RTV around the outside. I will be putting the RTV on the oil pump itself, but quickly I'm just going to lube up this O-ring. The oil is going to help seal and help it stay in place while I get the oil pump on. Now I am going to lube up the crankshaft and this hole on the inside before I RTV it, and why not this back plate too. Now we're ready for my favorite activity, RTV. The path is around the O-ring, above this bolt, around the whole thing here, and you just stay on the inside of all of the holes all the way around, back down to where the O-ring is. Another thing you should do is clean all of your surfaces before you do this. I did in fact do that, I just forgot to mention it. And the bolts that hold the oil pump to the block also get thread locker. So I'm just gonna get the thread locker ready on all of them. Now your oil pump is driven off the crank. It has 2 flat spots, 1 on each side. So you need to line up your oil pump with those flat spots. And there are dowels as well. And we can get all of our bolts started now that everything's lined up. And we have 5 foot-pounds or 60 inch-pounds for the oil pump. Okay, that's our oil pump. Just clean up a little bit of the splooge. Wasn't too much anywhere. mostly on the top. Unnecessary, but I like to do it. And right after that, we can get our front seal installed. Like every other gasket in the world, quick lube it up. And I will again be using a Company 23 tool to install this. So just get it started and tighten down the tool, or you can just use anything that is close to the size and hit it until it's flush. The right tool for the job is always super nice. Makes it easier, makes it faster, makes it so you know it's done right. So there's our front seal complete. All right, so right now my main goal is to get this thing on the engine stand. It's gonna be way easier to work on the engine stand. So the reason I installed the oil pump is so I could put both of these on and use the Company 23 tool to hold the crank so I can tighten the flywheel and the pressure plate bolts. The only thing that sucks is that the oil pump sticks out lower than the block, so it's gonna be resting on the oil pump while it's turned around. But we'll be quick about it. So the first thing we gotta do is make sure you got your woodruff key installed on your crank. I bought a new crank, so I had to switch it from the old one to the new one and slide it on your pulley, and we can put our bolt in. This is all temporary. I'm not torquing this down right now. I just want it held into place. All right, I got the engine turned around and I have the Company 23 crank pulley holder. You can see it right there, holding the crank so I can tighten down the flywheel bolts. And I do have brand new bolts for the flywheel, along with brand new bolts for the clutch plate. And now we torque these to 55 foot-pounds and we go in a star pattern. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I just go around one more time and check them all. That's why I always double check, because I accidentally moved the engine, so I had to reposition it. I forgot where I was and I missed one. So always double check. Now with our flywheel, clutch disc, and pressure plate installed, we can get it back on the engine stand. Oh no, I forgot. Well, I can't believe I forgot that, but we gotta take the pressure plate back off. Now the fun part, I'm gonna try to do this by hand, and it could be a huge mistake. Oh, it's heavy, but we can do it. Oh yeah, easy peasy. Now that we've got our engine on the engine stand, we are ready to do our heads. Now I could have put the heads on while I was on the table, but it was only gonna make it harder to get it on the engine stand later. So we'll fully assemble one side of the heads, flip it over, and do the other side. All right, so starting with the cylinder head for cylinders 2 and 4. Just gonna quick blow out all of the holes here with compressed air, make sure nothing's in them, including the bolt holes, as well as just make sure the mating surface is clean. Now you need to install your gasket the correct way. You see, if I install it this way, this hole is like half covered and this hole in the gasket goes absolutely nowhere. So if we flip that around, now this hole lines up and there's nothing over here. So just make sure you install your gasket correctly. And again, clean the mating surface of the head. Everything should be clean. And now you can just slide your head onto the dowels, being careful not to, scratch everything up. The dowels should hold the head on there. Again, more cleaning, make sure all your threads are clean. You should be using brand new bolts, and you want to use lubricant for the threads and the top and bottom of the washer. I'm going to be using ARP fastener lube here. So get everything lubed up and you can start putting your bolts in. All right, it's already time to torque down our head. It's actually a pretty intricate process, so make sure you follow along. Quick overview. The torque sequence is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Or on the diagram, it'll be A, B, C, D, E, F. And we're gonna tighten them to 30 foot-pounds and then 70 foot-pounds, loosen them 180 degrees, tighten them to 7.5 foot-pounds, tighten them to 22 foot-pounds, tighten them again to 52 foot-pounds, and then they all get 90 degrees, and then they all get 45 degrees, and then just A and B, the two corners, get an extra 45. Never seen a torque sequence quite like that, but let's give her a go. So the first thing we're doing is 30 foot-pounds, and then the second one is 70 foot-pounds. Now we're gonna loosen them in reverse order. So we're gonna go in reverse order, 180 degrees loosen, and then a second time. Yeah, so basically they're gonna be completely loose by the end of it, but they want you to do it in 2 stages. So the first stage was pretty tight, and the second stage they are completely loose. But now we can retighten them for the final time here. And the first one is 7.5 foot-pounds or 90 inch-pounds. Next up is 22 foot-pounds, followed by 52 foot-pounds, And we only got 3 more. We got 90, 45, and then A and B at 45 again. So I'm breaking out the really long breaker bar here just to make it that much easier. And then another 45. And now just A and B, another 45. Before we get our camshafts in, clean all of the mating surfaces, clean the lobes, clean where the camshafts ride, wipe everything down, blow it out with air. Now we want to lube the buckets. This is why something thicker than engine oil is really nice to use, because you're gonna be flipping this thing over, moving it around. The thicker stuff will stick to all the surfaces better. On top of lubing the buckets, you want to lube where the camshafts themselves ride. And again, after lubing, clean off your mating surface. And then also make sure that you lube up your top section, as well as, hopefully you can see, I have RTV along the outside, this middle section, and the right side. So go ahead and follow the RTV that I did. Basically, it's just the right, the left side, the middle, and stay on the inside of the dowels and the bolts. Now you can go ahead and put your camshafts into position. Make sure you put your camshafts in before you put the cap on, or you're going to be redoing it. And I want to get all of this lubed up while I can reach it as well. Now another thing I should mention, when you're installing your camshafts, you want both of your cam lobes pointing up. That way when you tighten the cap down, it doesn't push any of your valves in. You shouldn't have to worry about any piston to valve touching at this point in your assembly. As long as your cams are pointing straight up, it doesn't matter where your pistons are in the cycle. Now, since I did some more lubing, I want to clean the surfaces off, and now we can put this top cap on. Don't forget to lube these as well. And another thing to note, it's gonna be really hard to see on this camera because the numbers are so small and ground down, but there are numbers on this and an arrow. The arrow points to the front of the engine, and the numbers match it up with the side. So for instance, this one says 286, and it says 286 right here as well. So I know that this cap faces this direction and goes on this side, not the other side. Next up, we can get our bolts in. If you notice, we have 3 different size bolts here, small, medium, and large, and they go in that order, front to back, small, medium, large. Now the front small 4 get torqued to 7.5 foot-pounds or 90 inch-pounds. And the middle and back section get torqued to 15 foot-pounds. And now that's our camshafts installed. You can go ahead and try to spin them by hand. They should be pretty free-flowing here, not much holding them down. Now I want to clean up any RTV that's squished out. Most importantly, where the front seals go. We don't want any RTV blocking our way, or of course any oil. And before we flip it over to do the other side, I want to get our cam seals installed. I will again be using a Company 23 tool to do this, and I still have 0 regrets about buying these tools because they've made everything so much easier. I will say, since I keep on praising the Company 23 tools, that I'm not sponsored by them. This is not a paid advertisement. I'm complimenting them because I like them. Your seal started, I can just use the tool to push them all the way into place. Nice and easy. And you just tighten it till the tool stops, and you'll notice that it's not all the way in, but it's also not all the way against the surface. Another reason why I like this tool so much is that it sets the depth for you. You just tighten it till it stops and you're done. So onto the other side, go ahead and lube the gasket, set it in there flush, tighten it down with the tool. Now I can go ahead and speed run the other side, clean the surface, gasket 2, bottom of the head, lube your bolts, 30 foot-pounds, 70 foot-pounds, loosen 180, loosen 180 again, 7.5 foot-pounds or 90 inch-pounds, 22 foot-pounds, 52 foot-pounds, 90 degrees, 45 degrees, and then A and B another 45. And that is our head torque down. Now again, we clean, then we lube. We can put in our camshafts, again making sure the lobes are facing up. The longer one is the intake side. Make sure you lube and get your gasket on the cam caps. Big bolts in the back, medium bolts in the middle, small bolts in the front. 7.5 foot-pounds or 90 inch-pounds for the front, 15 foot-pounds for the middle and the back. Again, after you get everything torqued down, clean up any excess RTV, especially in the front here. Once those surfaces are clean, you can lube up your cam seals, set them in place, and I'll be using Company 23 tool to set them in correctly. Okay, onto the front of the engine, we're gonna get our water pump on and our tensioner bracket. Couple things about the water pump. One, use a new gasket on the back. And two, when you buy a master gasket set, it comes with this rubber gasket here. I think it just helps with vibration, but I got a new one, so I used it. And then obviously make sure you put your gasket on the right way. This one only goes on one way. And the torque spec for this is 10 foot-pounds or 120 inch-pounds. And it says to do that twice. So it says just go start here, go in a circle, and you do the same torque twice in a row. So again, double check all of them. It's even in the manual to double check all of them. This gasket compresses, so they want you to make sure that after the gasket compresses, they're all still at the correct torque. Next up is our tensioner bracket, and this doesn't have a gasket. It's not sealing any liquid, but it does have a couple pieces of foam. Again, it came in my master gasket kit, so I did put them on. Is the world going to end without them? Probably not. And the tensioner bracket gets 18 foot-pounds. Okay, it's finally time that we get the timing situated. Starting with the left-hand side of the engine cover. This one's kind of a pain to get on. Not really a fan of getting this one in position. I kind of just bop it into place. These are only 3 foot-pounds or 36 inch-pounds. I literally don't trust my torque wrench that low, so I'm just gonna feel these out by hand. We're just bolting plastic here. No need to go crazy. And we got 5 bolts for this section. The master gasket kit did come with some new like O-ring metal washer things for the inners, along with foam for the inside. But I am just reusing the ones that were already on here. It seemed like it was gonna be a pain to replace them when these are fine. I say that now, but I might regret it when this thing is rattling later. But if I honestly thought that was gonna happen, I would have replaced the gaskets. All right, with our inner covers on, it's time to get our idlers, our tensioner on, and get our belt on. Okay, time to get all of our cam sprockets on. There is a dowel on the end of the camshaft and a dowel in this hole, so make sure that you get those in the right spot. Very important that you get those in the right spot for your timing and for the camshaft to seat correctly. I'm also noticing it's way easier to turn our camshafts around now that I can put a little bit more torque on these with the cam gear since it's bigger. So the camshafts are spinning really well. They feel great. Now we can get all of our cam gear bolts started. All right, now it's time that we torque these down. They only get 22 foot-pounds, so it's not that much. The hard part is holding them while you torque them, unless you have Company 23 tools. Then it's easy. So I'm gonna hold the sprocket with the Company 23 tool and torque it down to 22 foot-pounds. Okay, now we're gonna use the Company 23 tool to get our camshafts into position. So you want to get it set up here halfway. These are still loose. Get them into the camshaft bolts, and then you can use this to move them into position. And once you're in time, go ahead and tighten down the bolt. Okay, now let's check out all the timing marks. I just want to make sure you can see what I see. So we have timing mark on the sprocket, and then on the oil pump is where you line that up. Moving over to the right side, or cylinder 1 and 3, the intake cam sprocket, 1 dot on top and 2 on bottom. That lines up with the exhaust side, 2 on bottom, and then the exhaust side has 1 on the left. And same thing with cylinders 2 and 4. Intake has 1 on top, 2 on the bottom. The exhaust has 2 on the top and 1 on the right side. Now the reason why you need this tool is because this side's under tension. Cylinder 4 exhaust valves are open and cylinder 2 intake valves are open. Those valve springs are pretty strong and they're putting tension on the cam. It makes it want to rotate. So you need that tool to hold everything in place. Now that everything's in time, we can start putting our tensioner and our idlers on. If you didn't buy a new tensioner, you need to compress this pin and put like an Allen key to hold it in place so that you can torque this in. So the tensioner goes there, this gear idler goes underneath it, The long skinny idler goes to the right of the tensioner, and then one more idler right next to the crank. There is a fourth idler that goes here, but we install that after the belt is in place. Now, if you didn't buy a new belt, hopefully you marked your old one, because new belts have these marks all the way around them to tell you where the belt is supposed to end up. It also has arrows pointing in the direction that it's supposed to spin. So we're going to start by lining up the dash mark with the crank, which should make the solid lines. On 3 of the corners, there are these timing belt guides. You can just loosen them. You don't have to take them completely off. So I'm just going to loosen them so that they slide down and out of the way. So as you go around, just make sure all of your timing marks are lining up. Okay, finally got that all situated. Let me put this idler in, and I'll show you everything before I continue. All right, well, I showed you those timing marks before. Let me show you them again, but with the belt in place. So the crank lines up, left-hand intake lines up, left-hand exhaust lines up. We come down and around, over the pump, under the idler, over this idler that I just put in. Exhaust for cylinders 1 and 3 line up, and intake for cylinders 1 and 3 line up as well. So that's our timing belt all in place. Now I'm going to torque down the idlers, and then we can pull the pin on the tensioner, spin the engine over a couple times, make sure everything stays in time, and that is our long block assembled in time. Let's check it out. Okay, starting with the small idler, this one is 20 foot-pounds, and now the tensioner is 30 foot-pounds, and the other 3 idlers are also 30 foot-pounds. Now, we pull the pin. That was anticlimactic, didn't really tension. I mean, it's tight. It'll tension as we spin it. Just to be safe, I'm gonna get all of our guides in place. And we're so close to being done, we might as well do it right. They want 40 thousandths of an inch gap in between these guides and the belt. So I have a 19 and a 20 thousandths, and I put them together. So I hold it in place for one corner, tighten the bolt down, move it to the other corner, tighten the bolt down. It's a pretty big gap. You could probably eyeball it, but I already have my feeler gauges out, so I'll just do it the right way. There we go. This one took a little finagling. I had to put the 40 thousandths here, push it in, and then tilt this other side up for the gap to be the right size all the way around. With our timing all in position, we can get rid of our timing holder here. Oh, I could have just pulled it out. I didn't really have to loosen it, but gets rid of the tension that way. Everything's still in time, lined up perfectly. Let's spin the motor over and hope everything goes well. To check your timing, you need to spin the engine over twice. That's because every 2 revolutions of the crankshaft is 1 revolution of the camshafts. So if I only spun the crankshaft 1 360, the crankshaft would be in time, but the camshafts would not be in time. And since what we're doing is making sure the engine stays in time, we need to spin it twice, minimum. So there's 1, everything feels fantastic, and there's 2. Okay, so we spun the crankshaft over twice. It felt super smooth, nothing bound up. If you're spinning your engine over and something does not feel right, stop and double check everything. The last thing you want to do is come this far, spend this much time, spend this much money, this much effort, all of the above, and ruin your engine before you can even get any enjoyment out of it. If you saw how easy mine was spinning over, I'll do another 2 revolutions. I'm just pulling down. It's going to be a little difficult, right? It's not going to be super easy. Now you're not just moving your pistons in and out, you're spinning your crankshafts and you're fighting those valve springs. But if it binds up, something is wrong. So again, another 2 revolutions. So I've done 4 revolutions total. Our crank is pointing straight up at the timing mark. Both of our intakes are pointing straight up at the timing mark, and both of our exhausts are pointing straight out. That means our long block is fully assembled and fully timed. Fully assembled as in it's a complete engine. Obviously, we still need to do the oil pan and the intake and all of those goodies. But before we do that, let's actually go back in time. I rebuilt our turbo while I was waiting for parts. So let's go catch you up with the turbo rebuild. Okay, it's me from the past. I'm still waiting on the machine shop and a couple companies to ship me the stuff I paid for, so we're gonna be rebuilding the turbo. If you guys don't remember or you weren't here for the last episode, this is what our turbo looks like. Not supposed to do that. So I went ahead and ordered this $65 rebuild kit off of eBay to get our turbo back in order. So step one here is actually getting down to our turbo. So we need to take off our oil and coolant lines, our vacuum lines, and our wastegate. So we can start on the bottom with our oil drain. And yeah, it's nice and disgusting. Everything's gonna get a very, very thorough clean before we put it back together. And then our coolant lines are on the side and our oil feed on top, which gives us a lot more room for the wastegate. Now the wastegate's held on by 2 bolts on the back, the same bolts that hold on the cold side of the turbo here. And we have our actual arm that's actuating our wastegate. That arm is just held on by this clip, so you just pry it off. With that clip out, we can unbolt the wastegate. With those 2 bolts out, this will just slide right off. Now in this case, the exhaust side is just held on by a V-band. And now this should be the exhaust side ready to come off, but it might need some influence here. Normally this isn't the hard part. I'm gonna hit it with some PB Blaster here. Wasn't really expecting this to not come apart easily. So while we wait for the PB Blaster to try to break apart this exhaust side, it's so rusty, I'm gonna go ahead and take off the intake side. Hopefully this side is a little easier. Now just like those 2 bolts at the top here holding the wastegate, there's just gonna be 4 more along the outside. So we can just break those loose, take them out by hand. Now I imagine this side would come off a lot nicer. There we go, we got one side off. And you can see our lovely intake side and all of its wobbliness. Now we just got to keep on persuading the exhaust side. All right, well 2 hours later, I finally got these separated. Not supposed to be this hard, not at all. Mine is just, I guess, a special example. I had to use a lot of penetrating oil and an air hammer to get this thing apart. You want to use the least force required to do anything, so you don't have to worry about damaging anything. Hopefully this goes a lot better for you. You can see there's a little nub right here and there's a little hole right here. So there is a dowel, so these do line up perfectly every time. You don't have to worry about that orientation. I don't think that's true for every turbo, but at least in this case, there's a nub. So these will only go back together one way. So for now, we're done with the exhaust side, and now we can take the actual core apart. So this exhaust side is actually a stud. This stud that goes all the way through is permanently attached to the exhaust side. So we have to hold this with a 12-point socket. I'm going to be using a 12-point wrench. And we have a nut on the other side that we have to take off. And this is reverse thread, so not lefty-loosey, righty-loosey. Now the last thing we need to take note of before we loosen this nut and take our core apart is the orientation of the fins, the stud, and the nut. You want your turbo to be as balanced as possible. This thing is spinning at tens of thousands of RPM. You don't want to unbalance it by making a mark permanently by shaving off metal or making an indent. In my case, I'm lucky. The nut has been shaved off to balance the nut, and that lines up perfectly where they shaved off some metal of the turbine itself. And I can see on the exhaust side, it is just opposite of where they shaved off metal from here. So if I line up the shaved nut with the shaved turbine, and that's opposite of the shaved exhaust side, I'll be in balance or close to. Now that you have taken note of where you should be well balanced, remember we got reverse thread, so righty-loosey. We can take off that nut and our turbine should come off nicely here. And if we flip it around, so should the exhaust side. Just push it on through. Now in my case, to take off this front plate here, we have a T30 Torx bit. And once those bolts are out, you can take off this front plate. On that front plate we just took off, we can push out that centerpiece. And now we have 3 even smaller Torx bits here. Once those 3 screws are out, you can pop that out. There's a little washer on the exhaust side, little spring retainer clip, we'll call it. Once you get that spring retainer, the bearing basically falls out. Mine wasn't too tight. And now you should be able to push the other bearing and this washer type thing out from the other side. And we just have one more thing to remove. And this center one being out is finally our turbo completely disassembled. All right, I almost forgot a couple pieces here. You can see on this front piece, we have what looks like a piston ring and that's because it actually acts like a piston ring and seals the front. So you need to remove this piece, and we actually have the same thing on the turbine here. And again, remove that piece. And that leaves us with our fully disassembled turbo. We have our turbine or the exhaust side, and we have our compressor side with everything in between. On the bottom here, this is everything that our kit is gonna be replacing. Everything else needs to be cleaned. And you can tell I've already done the cleaning that I want to do to this thing. It's really never gonna be perfect. So once you're satisfied with the level of cleaning you've done, we can just go ahead and move all of the old parts out of the way, except for that nut. I almost forgot that nut. We need that. Now our kit does come with a new nut, but this one has been balanced, so I'm gonna be reusing it, and we won't be using this nut. So let's go ahead and get all of our new parts out on the table. And we can do a little bit of organizing on what goes where. Okay, we basically put it back together like this. So now the fun part begins. We can rebuild our turbo. You'll see that the first thing we need to put in goes right in the middle of this hole. And this circle needs to line up with that square. And that's really all you get for a stopping point. There's no snap rings to hold it in place. There's no groove to hold it in place. You simply push it in until this circle is lined up with this square. Now I lubricated the inside here and I lubricated this, and we just got to get it going. You want to start it straight as possible. Make sure everything is clean. And obviously you want to start it so that the hole is facing down, because you're not going to really be able to turn it once you get started. Now I'm going to be using an extension to hit this down. The extension needs to be just the right size that it can go through the hole, but obviously big enough that it doesn't go through what we're hitting in. And there we have it. Our circle is completely visible. We are done with the first part. Next up, we can install our brass bearing, again coating it in oil. And these should just slide into place, but if you want, you can give her a light tap to make sure it's seated with the same socket that we use for the other part. And on the exhaust side, we have this spring retainer clip that holds in the bearing. For this, you want to make sure that the spring is up. Okay, and with our exhaust bearing in and the spring retainer clip, we can flip it over to the intake side. And again, coat our bearing in oil, drop her in. And our next piece has a flat bottom. Make sure the flat piece is on the bottom towards the oil drain. Again, using a socket to lightly seat it in place. Okay, now it's time to put our piston rings. Just kidding, they're not actually called piston rings. But we got to put our seals on both our turbine shaft here, and the smaller one goes on this piece. So once you get both this and this one installed, we're ready to put our turbine and shaft back in, but don't forget this piece here. Slide it through. Now we have this spacer washer here. Slide it onto the shaft, and this piece here. Make sure the intricate design here is facing in, and this is on the bottom. These bolts are spaced out that you can only put it on the correct orientation, so as long as you have this in, you're good to go. Now for these tiny little screws that go into this, I'm going to be using some red Loctite. You definitely don't want these coming out. So red Loctite, and they are pretty tight. I mean, they're really small. You don't want to strip them. Now you can go ahead and insert your seal on the front here. It might help to use a little pick to help push that seal into place, so you're not just jabbing it in there. There we go. Next up, we're ready to put this piece on. And this part does need some RTV gasket. Just make sure it is high temp. I'm going to be putting it on this piece, and then I'm going to be spreading it out with a brush. Wipe off any excess in the middle here. Do not want to starve your turbo of oil because you got gasket in it. Then just make sure that these two big chunks line up. And then for these bolts, I'm going to use blue Loctite. And just like that, we're ready for the intake side. Slide it on. And remember, this is lefty tighty, righty loosey. It's a left-handed thread. Okay, and at this point, your turbo is basically reassembled. You just put the exhaust and the intake side on and you're done. Before you do that, you want to send this out to get balanced. Now, I'm not doing that, and we'll get into why I'm not doing that in a second. But first, let me show you the rest of the build. Let's put the exhaust side on, the intake side on. Now, I'm sure you remember how hard it was for me to take this turbo apart. I would recommend putting some anti-seize on this before you do. And again, I'm not doing that, and we'll get into it in a second. Remember, there is a dowel and a hole that you need to line up, at least on my turbo. If not, you need to align the turbo however you needed to. Okay, and then once we got it all put back together, you may notice that there's a drill with the wire wheel. It's because I had to clean up the housings to get it seated back together, but now we can clamp the exhaust back together. Now, technically, to finish this, we would just have to bolt our intake side back on. Again, just make sure you clock it the right way. And I can still see the outlines of the washers, so I know that this is the right spot. And with those 4 bolts on, that leaves us with our wastegate. Make sure you slide this pin in first before you bolt it on. And lastly, we can just slide our clip back onto our wastegate. Bada boom. That is a rebuilt turbo. Check out the before and after on our shaft play. You can't even see, I'm actually wiggling it right now, and it's not moving. Compared to what it was before, obviously this is way better. Well, this is gonna take a bit of a turn from both what you were expecting and from what I was expecting. So obviously we just finished rebuilding our turbo, and it's definitely rebuilt. There's no shaft play, you just saw that. It spins really well, and I honestly thought that I was gonna tell you guys that we weren't gonna be using that turbo, and I was just rebuilding that turbo to show you guys how to do it. That being said, that was my first turbo rebuild, so let me know in the comments if I did anything wrong or if I could have done anything better. I always want to improve, and I know there are some professionals in the comments and some not so professionals. That being said, I thought I was going to show you guys this lovely FP branded turbo and say this rebuild was just for fun, a learning experience for both you and me. But unfortunately, I can't even use this turbo. But let's slow down for a second. You might be asking how I got a turbo and how I got a turbo that I can't even use. And it's actually a really cool story to me. Now, I've only been making YouTube videos for around 10 months, so I've actually never had a sponsor for a video, and that's still true for this one. I still don't have a sponsor. But crazy enough, one of the viewers of the engine teardown video was nice enough to leave a comment saying they had a turbo for me. Now, honestly, I didn't believe them at that point, but I responded and said, hey, message me on Instagram, and they did. And at that point, I was still iffy, still didn't believe them. And that very nice viewer said, pay for shipping, and the turbo is yours for free. And now at this point, I'm still a little iffy. I said, okay, so I'm getting scammed out of 20, 40, 50 bucks for shipping, right? And they sent me an image on Instagram saying, look, here's shipping, $23 to ship it to me. And I went for it. I was like, you know what, send it, and if it's real, it's real. If not, I lost 50 bucks. But believe it or not, they sent me a tracking number, and the tracking number ended up being real, and I got a turbo. And I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. Shout out to Brian Wolf. If he leaves a comment, make sure you guys show him a lot of love. Brian Wolf is officially the first sponsor we've had on this channel, and it wasn't even a company, it was a viewer. So that it really touched my heart. I appreciate you. Show him some love. Unfortunately, on that note, Brian, if you do want your turbo back, I would happily ship it back to you. I cannot use it. And let me show you guys why. It's because this wastegate has been welded. Now, obviously, the turbo is still good. There's no shaft play at all. The turbo is fine. It's just the fact that he had an external wastegate set up while this stock Subaru still has an internal wastegate set up. So it would just add to the build. If I want to use the FP green turbo he sent me, I would need to spend some more money and set up an external wastegate setup. So for now, even though out of the kindness of Brian's heart, I have a FP green upgraded bigger turbo, we're gonna have to stick with the stock one. So 2 options, Brian. You can either let me keep the turbo, and maybe a future Subaru video will be me upgrading to that bigger turbo with an external wastegate setup, maybe some upgraded headers, downpipe, uppipe, would be a really fun video. Or Brian, if you want it back, completely understand, I'll ship it back to you. We have a few things we need to go over with my engine build and my turbo build. With the engine, we actually have to take off some of our timing because I forgot something that goes behind this timing cover. Now, this is gonna sound kind of dumb, but I wanted the engine to look just like this for a picture. So the factory service manual was telling me to put on our water pipes and our oil pan, and I kind of ignored it because I wanted a picture. But it's fine because we have YouTube magic. We can go back in time with a simple snap of the fingers. And now that we're back in time, this is the oil line that I missed. It's got 2 banjo bolts, and I have brand new crush washers. And now, since I didn't forget this oil line because we went back in the past, we can snap our fingers again. Ooh, I was gonna do the snapping thing, but I forgot. I'm interrupting the snap. Previously, I torqued these bolts only halfway. So there's actually 2 steps. I only did step 1. Step 1 is 22 foot-pounds. Step 2 is 45 degrees. I get a redo because I happen to have to redo this anyway. So we're going 22 foot-pounds and then an extra 45 degrees. Now I'm gonna obviously do the same thing to the other 3, but back to the snapping. We can snap our fingers again and bam! We're back to where we were, except for we have our oil line and our cam gears are torqued correctly. So here's that oil line I was talking about. You can see that bolt is way too long to take out with the timing cover on. So it's definitely way too long to put it in with the timing cover on. So that's mistake number 1 I redid. Mistake number 2 was our cam gears were at 22 foot-pounds, but we needed an extra 45 degrees, which ends up around 75 foot-pounds. And again, since I had to redo my timing, there's timing mark 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Everything's back in time, which means we can go back to the good old test of spinning it over twice and making sure it stays in time. No binding, no crashing. There's 1 and 2, and I've now done the timing belt on this car twice. But what this actually means is we can continue on doing fun stuff. So I'm currently missing this bolt, so I'm not gonna put the timing cover on. We'll do something else, and I just gotta go to the local hardware store and buy that bolt. Okay, before I keep going with the coolant lines on top of the engine, I have 2 of these plates. Those 2 plates bolt to where the oil control solenoids go. Now I'm probably gonna catch a lot of flack for this, but I don't have the gaskets for these. The machine shop took them off, threw away the gaskets, and the master gasket kit did not come with them, so I'm just gonna be using RTV. And then we can just start the bolts. And these are only 5 foot-pounds. And now I'm gonna put these oil control valves in. And now I can finish up this side with the oil line with brand new crush washers. Also up here on both sides are some cam position sensors. These just slide in and have a bolt. Next up, part of our breather system, I actually bought an IAG AOS air oil separator. So instead of the stock breather pipe, I'm gonna install the IAG one just to make life easier later. Now I have a bunch of cleaning and prep work to do here, so I'm just gonna make it really quick. I actually bought a whole coolant line hose kit, so all of the rubber coolant lines are gonna be replaced, and I bought a new oil cooler. So here's a nice before and after. So new coolant hoses, a little bit of cleaning, good to go. This one's gonna be a nice before and after on this piece. Obviously looks 10 times better. It's not perfect, but at least I won't get all greasy just by touching it. Now I know I took all the coolant lines apart in one go, but I've already been playing around with this and it seems like it's just easier to put on in separate pieces. So you might as well just take it off in separate pieces too. Before we do the major coolant pipe, make sure you have your O-rings on. Now we can put the top coolant hoses on. This has some breather hoses as well. Make sure you slide this hose on first. After you get this coolant hose on, this breather hose needs to go on. And that looks like everything is in position. We got 4 long bolts to connect the coolant pipe to the actual block. The coolant hose kit I bought came with brand new worm gears for every single line that's replaced. And there's a big bolt for this back section. And I don't want these to leak, so I'm gonna check these by hand. And that's most of our breather hoses and our coolant lines that go on top of the engine in place. I did forget our knock sensor, but I'm fairly certain I can get this on with our coolant lines in place. It's a little tight, but definitely possible. Definitely would have been easier to do it without the coolant lines in the way. And of course I forgot a couple clamps, so let's get this breather hose clamp on and tighten this hose clamp here. This was just held on with a zip tie before, but I'm putting a worm gear clamp on it as well. It is just a breather line, so the zip tie could have been fine, but better just to get a actual clamp on it. Now this is definitely something you could have done before you did the timing, but I was just so excited to get the engine in time. So now that we have the engine timed, let's get the valve cover on. I cleaned up our valve cover, got new gaskets, lubed them up, got them in place. But before we put them in, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of just douse everything with oil here. And there's actually RTV that needs to go in a couple places too. So before I cover this up and don't have access to it, squirting everything with oil, even though I have assembly lube on here. I don't know what happens when you mix assembly lube and oil, but I guess we'll find out. And I'm gonna clean the mating surface here. And now it's time for some RTV. The RTV basically goes wherever the elevation changes. So we start in this corner and come down to this corner, and we just have to do this section here. Now, I was told in the last video that I've been using way too much RTV, so I'm gonna try to use a little less this time, especially since there's already gonna be a gasket here, and this is kind of doubling up. So we have that section and this corner here, and then being careful not to lose your gasket. Top corner started, and then kind of slide it up and under the timing cover. Get the other corner started, and then the longer bolt in the back here. And the torque sequence is A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then you repeat A, B, C, D again. Now we can flip the engine over and do the same thing on the other side. So again, just going to doubly make sure everything's covered in oil. A lot of people have been concerned about the amount of oil or assembly lube I've been using. I like to assemble the engine with assembly lube, get it in the car, and I'm gonna leave the spark plugs out, disconnect the fuel, just like we did with our compression test, and cycle the key a couple times and just let the engine crank over with the starter and build oil pressure that way. Clean our mating surface. We gasket the corners. Got new gaskets on. They're nice and lubed up. 6.4 Newton meters, 4.7 foot-pounds, or I'm just gonna use 60 inch-pounds. Something I forgot to do on the other side is we can put our cam position sensor in. Right next to that cam position sensor, we can put some more oil control valves in. The machine shop was nice enough to not throw these gaskets away, so that's lovely. I will be reusing them. And I'm just gonna quick do the same thing on the other side. We got our cam position sensor and the oil control valve. All right, onto the bottom side of the engine. I put these 4 bolts in. They're just our engine mounts. I'll come back to them later, but just keeping it organized for now. We have this big old plug here that I'm going to use thread sealant on. So I've got a lot of thread sealant on this big one, and that goes here. Next up, we can install our baffle, and I bought a Killer Bee oil pickup. Whether you have the Killer Bee oil pickup or the stock pickup, do not forget this O-ring. Without the O-ring, you're not gonna have very much oil pressure, and you're not gonna have a very happy engine. So once you got your oil pickup and your baffle in place, so we got 2 bolts for the oil pickup. They're different from the bolts that the baffle uses. They are also higher torque, but before you get everything tight, make sure you get all the bolts in so everything lines up. Be very careful not to drop a bolt at this time. The last thing you wanna be doing is fishing a bolt out from your engine block. Take an extra 5 minutes to just really not drop a bolt here is gonna save you possibly 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how unlucky you get trying to get that bolt out. All right, so you torque down the oil pickup first. It's 10 Newton meters, 7.5 foot-pounds, or I'm gonna be doing 90 inch-pounds. Make sure you got that O-ring in there. All right, and for the baffle, we got 6.4 Newton meters, 4.7 foot-pounds, or I'm just gonna do 60 inch-pounds. On top of our new oil pickup, I have a new oil pan. My new oil pan came with a new gasket right here. Other than this O-ring here, we need RTV all the way around the outside. Make sure you stay on the inside of the bolts. So basically follow this divot, go inside the bolt, follow the divot, go inside the bolt. All right, I got the oil pan all gasketed up and ready. So I'm gonna quick clean the surface one last time. And of course the oil pan only goes on one way. Just make sure that this hole lines up with that hole. All right, super low torque for the oil pan. It's 5 Newton meters, 4 foot-pounds, or I'm going to be doing 48 inch-pounds. And no torque sequence for this. Just gonna be going in a circle. And I'm a firm believer in double checking your torque specs, so I'm gonna go around twice. All right, turning the engine around, we can install our oil cooler. Make sure you lube up your oil cooler gasket. Make sure you got all your clamps on before you put your hoses on. And for the oil cooler, we have 54 Newton meters or 40 foot-pounds. And then we have a bolt up front here to hold our coolant lines in place. Okay, oil cooler and all the coolant lines to and from are installed. Next up, the coolant lines that go from the water pump to the coolant lines that go over the top of the engine. If you're not weird like me and want to take a picture of your engine without all this stuff in the way, definitely install it while the timing cover is off. I, again, am just a little weird. Okay, honestly, wasn't too bad, but it's easier to do without the timing cover on. And then we can get our oil dipstick up and through here. New O-rings on here as well, don't forget them. All right, we're cruising right along. The parts pile on the ground's getting smaller and smaller, always a super good feeling. We're getting so close that I actually started to make a list of the things that I want to do and what order I'm going to do them in. So we're moving back to the front of the engine to do the timing cover and the harmonic balancer. So the reason why I didn't do the timing cover earlier is because I was missing a bolt, and you can see now I got a bolt, and just like the other ones, it has a lock washer and a normal washer. So now I know this one isn't going to leak. It didn't leak before with the missing bolt, but just really want to be sure. So let's go ahead and slide our inner timing cover on. Both of these hose clamps are in the way of the timing cover, so let's move those out of the way. This center section has 2 gaskets, top and bottom, and it's got 7 of these bolts that have the thickens to hold it exactly in place. And this is going into plastic, so no need to over tighten it. And then you just have 1 on each side. And you got 4 long bolts for the left side and 3 long bolts for the right side of the engine. Now we can remove our crank bolt that we use to spin the engine over, because now we can install our harmonic balancer. Remember, the crankshaft has a keyway, and so does your harmonic balancer, so line those up. Now once you got your crank pulley on, there is a 2-step torque for the crank pulley. Step 1 is 47 Newton meters or 35 foot-pounds. And then step 2 is an extra 60 degrees. It should end up around 135 foot-pounds. So there's 60 degrees or 135 foot-pounds. If we want to, we can spin the engine over again at this point. We haven't really changed anything that should matter, but nice to double check everything. And yeah, I'd say we're still good to go. Okay, 3 things on the back of the engine I want to take care of, and all 3 related to coolant. First one, we have a hard line here. We have a new gasket, and we have the same scenario on the other side. New metal gasket for this hard line. Number 3 is I got a cylinder 4 cooling mod, and it needs to go to the back of the left-hand cylinder head next to, believe it or not, cylinder 4. So we go ahead and take this plug out, and all that the cylinder 4 cooling mod is replacing this plug with a coolant line. Just make sure that you put high temp RTV on the threads before you thread this in. And of course you can do this with your engine installed in your car. It's just easier to do when it's out. Now at the beginning of the episode, I mentioned there's a couple things that we need to fix on the engine and a couple things on the turbo as well. Now I skipped 2 steps on this turbo because I really thought I was going to be using the one Brian gave me, but as of now we're still using this one. Now I missed a step when I put the intake housing on, and I missed a step when I took the exhaust housing on. So we just need to take off our lines, take off our housing, and fix the issue. Now we can take off our wastegate. Now we can take off our intake housing, and we can take off our exhaust housing. Okay, well I tried for 5 seconds to take the exhaust housing off, and it's still a pain like it was before, so I'm not gonna mess with it. To be honest, the step that I was going to do wasn't required. It was just kind of a nice thing to do. And that step was to put anti-seize on, so the exhaust housing didn't rust like it already has. It's not a required step, and I can't get it off, so I'm not going to. It's my opinion that I don't even need this V-band clamp for this exhaust side because of how stuck this exhaust side is. The step I missed on the intake side is to reapply a gasket around the compressor housing so we don't have any boost leaks. Okay, here we go. So again, a very thin layer of high temp RTV gasket around the compressor housing to prevent boost leaks. And now we can just bolt this puppy back together again. Okay, and with that issue fixed and our lines back on, we're ready to bolt this thing to the engine. Now we can get our up pipe back in place so we can bolt our turbo on. When you bolt on the bracket, leave this nut loose so you can swivel this. That way you make sure the turbo lands in the right spot. Now when you're sliding on your turbo, make sure you slide your oil drain line on at the same time that you slide it over these studs on the up pipe. And you might have to rotate your up pipe, so that's why you leave that bolt loose, or that nut loose. So we got a banjo bolt for the oil feed line. Make sure you got new crush washers on. And we have a banjo bolt for the coolant return. And there is a bracket for the coolant return line as well that gets a bolt. It shares the bracket with the oil return line, and I'll show you all of this in a second once all the bolts are tight. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. My up pipe might look a little different. It is still my stock up pipe, but I took all the heat shielding off. if you remember my engine disassembly. If not, I'll put up a before here. But the heat shield on my up pipe had a hole in it, and it wasn't even attached to the up pipe. The heat shield has 4 welds, 2 on the bottom and 2 on the top here. All 4 of those welds were broken. I'm like 99% sure that that heat shield on the up pipe was rattling over every single bump, and it would have annoyed me so much. So I took off that heat shield. So let's go over the bolts that hold the up pipe and the turbo to the engine. We have 1 bolt here for the bracket and 1 bolt here for the bracket. And then we have 1, 2, 3 studs that hold the turbo to the up pipe. And then our oil feed line bolts here, and our coolant return line goes down and bolts in here. And that coolant line shares a bolt with the oil drain line as well. And here's our last coolant line. We will obviously get this later. Okay, and I believe this is the last time we're gonna be on the bottom side of the engine while we're on the engine stand. So we're gonna go ahead and get our exhaust on. Got new exhaust manifold gaskets for this. Our exhaust manifold is not pretty, and that's okay with me. I don't think this is factory, but we have 5 studs and 1 bolt, and I'm just gonna keep it that way. And we got some brand new Subaru Group N engine mounts. Our last engine mount was not even attached anymore, so this wasn't even just an upgrade, this was a must. Now I'm super sad, but the washers on the engine stand are in the way of our engine mounts. Let's fix that, I suppose. Okay, I got those 2 washers out of the way, and now we can actually put our engine mounts on. So I was putting the engine mounts on the wrong way. I had them on the right side, you know, left side, but I had them flipped around. So if you guys ever are putting something on and it's just not feeling right, not sitting right, like it wasn't even sitting flush, just double check everything. Now I'm gonna put our oil filter on just because I wanna seal up the engine even more. And of course, just like every other gasket, you always lube up the O-ring on an oil filter. I'm not pre-filling this because obviously the engine is upside down and it'll all just drain out. Okay, it's time to put our intake on, but I wanted to do a quick little walk around to show you what goes where on the intake. Let's start off with the first thing you're gonna need, and that's your gaskets for your intake manifold. You put your intake manifold on. Without those, it's immediately coming off. Next up on the front, we have 4 sensors, 1 for your crank position, 1 for your coolant temp, 1 for your oil pressure switch, and the other one is for your power steering. On the back, we have the inlet for the turbo, your blow-off valve. Make sure that the hose is connected. It's gonna be really hard to put that hose on when the engine's in the car, so just put that hose on now. This nipple and this nipple are for these 2 coolant lines, and this PVC nipple on a stock car would go to this, but I'm going to be installing an IAG AOS, so I'm taking this off and putting their Y fitting on just to make it easier for the future. But if you don't have an IAG AOS, those 2 nipples would go to this. Other than that, make sure your knock sensor faces up and make sure you feed this coolant line through the intake. The rest of it should be accessible and easily to get to once your intake is on. I also did a little bit of cleaning on this beforehand, but it wasn't really worth showing. So let's just feed that coolant line through. Also make sure the clamp for the turbo inlet is on, because you won't be able to get that on after. Get all the wires in the right spot, all the hoses in the right spot. There we go. So I can plug in these sensors on the front that I pointed out before. Everything's lining up. The coolant hoses on the back are going on. Okay, I'm not seeing anything out of place. Oh, hold on, let me get the knock sensor plugged in. Okay, everything's looking in place. Let's go ahead and bolt the intake down, and then I'll show you around. Oh man, we are getting close to putting this thing in. Look how complete it is. All right, let me show you around the intake. Here's the 4 wires on the front I told you about. That 1 coolant hose goes through the intake and it'll go to your coolant expansion tank. In this dark little crevice, we have our knock sensor plugged in, and we have a coolant hose going to and from the throttle body. Again, that nipple on the bottom would have gone to the breather next to the turbo, but I have an IAG AOS, so I'm not doing that. Another one that's hidden is the boost/vacuum line that goes from the turbo to the wastegate, and that comes up and right there. And I think that's most everything that you need to know of. You can still get to all of this when the engine's in. It's just obviously easier to do when the engine's out. All right, Saturday morning, I have all day today to get this thing wrapped up. We have a very long list of things to do to go for our first test drive, so we better get cracking. First thing is our oil fill neck. The master gasket kit does come with a new O-ring for this. Lube it up, slide it in. Next up on the front, we have our alternator and our AC compressor bracket. I used this loop on top to pull the engine, so I'll be putting it back on to do the same thing to put it in. And we lift the back of the engine from this loop, which is actually the intercooler bracket. All right, last thing before we get the engine on the hoist is our coolant expansion tank. We have one hose that goes to the bottom and one hose that goes to the top. Oh boy, it's good to see the engine hoist out. That means we are ready. Take it off the engine stand and put it in the car. But wait, there's actually some things that we did in the past that we had to do before we put the engine in. So let me catch you up to date with all the things that I did before we put the engine in. All right, before I put this engine in, I want a deep clean. All right, maybe not deep, but at least got to clean up the frame rails and the subframe. And I bought a can of single stage paint. So I'm gonna sand and repaint that frame rail. And same thing on this other side. I wanna just clean it, sand it, paint it, so I don't have to worry about rust there and rust right there. So a nice, gritty close-up for you guys on the subframe. This is far worse than the frame rails, especially on the right or the passenger side. We can't spend all this time and money cleaning and rebuilding the turbo, cleaning and rebuilding the engine, just to put it back in a dirty, unpainted engine bay. All right, after just a quick clean, honestly, looking a lot better, much more presentable. So I'm just gonna quick sand this with some 600 grit and just hit it with a single stage paint out of a spray can, meaning literally it's got the base coat or the color and the clear coat all in one. It's like 45 bucks for a good can from a local store that mixes it. Might not be a perfect paint match because, you know, it's new paint and this is old and faded and dirty, but it'll definitely look better than this. Okay, a very light sanding and wiping it all clean with wax and grease remover. And I did a little bit of masking on some stuff. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's probably gonna be some overspray, but I covered up like the grounds and the plugs and all of the hoses that were nearby. This is definitely not a how-to on how to restore an engine bay to be a show car quality. That being said, we can finally start spraying. And the paint turned out awesome. Yeah, there's a little overspray on the subframe and over there too, but just some one-stage paint out of a normal spray can makes a huge difference on how good it looks. Got rid of all those scratches. The battery tray was actually worse than the frame rails, so super happy with that result. I bought a new throwout bearing. Probably didn't need to. This one probably only has 8,000 miles on it, but I wanted to be safe and I bought a new one since I was yanking on it while trying to get the engine out. Now I'm sure I didn't pull hard enough to break anything, you know, because this is a pull type clutch. It's supposed to be pulled, but like I said, just being safe, we're gonna replace it. Now when I pulled this engine, you actually pull the clutch fork out and the throwout bearing comes with the engine. But now what we have to do is release the throwout bearing from the pressure plate. If I flip this over, you can see there's this little ring around the outside. That's the retainer clip. And if you look, when I lift this up and down, it's actually spring loaded. So to release the throwout bearing, you have to have that spring pressed in and also pull the throwout bearing out at the same time. So the way I like to do this is with a couple screwdrivers, put them underneath the throwout bearing on top of the spring and push those down with one hand and pull the throwout bearing out with the other. And now we have our pressure plate ready to be installed at the engine. There is one more thing you could do to this pressure plate before reusing it, and that's have this surface refinished. This pressure plate only has 8,000 miles on it. It is pretty good, pretty smooth. I'm just gonna be reusing it. It's only like $40 at my local shop to have it resurfaced, but I don't think there's a need to. So old versus new here, not too much different. The old one's just got a little rust on it, but probably would have been fine. Now, even though the throwout bearing comes off with the engine, you actually install the engine with the throwout bearing already on the transmission. That way you can have your clutch fork already in position and all set up. Now, before we do that, I actually cleaned off all our surfaces and we need to re-grease them just a little bit. You don't need a lot, just a thin amount of grease. Now, I like to lube the little piece that sits inside the crankshaft as well, but you don't want any lube on your splines here. So after lubing everything else, I'm just gonna give the splines a quick clean. Some other things I lubed are the clutch fork pivot, and the inside of the throwout bearing as well. So now we can go ahead and slide our clutch fork back through the hole and our throwout bearing as well. Make sure you orientate this the correct direction. This piece that sticks out needs to go towards the pressure plate. Notice on the left side there's a little notch. Make sure you have it the correct orientation so it slides all the way in place. And we can give her a couple quick test pulls. Everything is sliding super nice. Happy with that. Now all we need to do to wrap this up is on the back side here. Here's the bolt that I used to pull it out. I also used that same bolt to push it in. You need to take this bolt off and put this plug back in to keep the pivot from sliding back out. And once you get that plug in, you are done here and ready for the next step. And I'm replacing our old pitch stop with a brand new Subaru Group N pitch stop. It's a good thing I decided to do this because this one is definitely worn out, unless they just come with this much play from factory, which I hope they don't. And we can just slide our new one right into place here. Now I'm actually going to leave this loose. That way I can torque it down or tighten it down once everything is in the correct spot. If I tighten this down, we won't have any wiggle room here. Another thing I'm going to replace before the engine is in is our transmission mount. Just like the engine mount and the pitch stop mount, I bought a Group N transmission mount. It's going to be a lot easier to change this with the engine out just because I can jack the front up and hopefully slip this out. At least that's my plan currently. So we got 6 bolts for the transmission mount. All right, so change plans. I can't jack the transmission up enough to slide this out. So what I'm going to have to do is drop this lower section. Now there's this cross member and a cross member here that's going to hold the transmission up so I don't have to worry about it falling. But I still want to be careful that I don't, for instance, pinch this O2 sensor wire back here. And it looks like I can just move that up for now. So what I'll do is put the jack here, unbolt the front, unbolt the back, and lower it slowly. Now the weight of the transmission is on our jack here, so I'm going to slowly lower it until the transmission is resting on these cross members and I can pull this out. Come on. There we go. Old transmission mount out. And now we just do the opposite and feed this one in. All right, now I want to get these bolts started so I know they're lined up before I jack it up and get a lot of weight on it. Looks like it's not gonna line up until I jack it up actually. Let's try jacking it up first. Okay, with it jacked up, do these bolt holes line up? Okay, I got 3 bolts started into the actual transmission. So now I'm gonna jack up the rest of the way here. New transmission mount installed. That one took longer than I thought it was gonna take, but it's done. Cabin air filter time. This one's an easy one. Take off our little stopper by pinching and pulling. Then we just push in on both sides right here. Now behind this little door is our cabin air filter. Old one's pretty dirty. And I'm super cool, so the new one is a K&N, of course. Not going with anything else. And so everybody else knows I am cool, the new door also says K&N on it. And just do the reverse, put your door back on. And another easy one, we got a new Cobb intake filter. I don't know how this old one got so crunched up, but I'm not gonna be using it. So easy peasy, unbolt, take it off. Nice thing about this Cobb intake is it does have a bell mouth, so it does help with airflow a little bit there. And slide our new one on. And then we can go ahead and just tighten this clamp down. Okay, it's time. We're gonna take this mounting bracket off from the actual engine stand. Time to take off our engine mount here. Try to support the weight of this so that it's not bending your bolts and ruining your threads. There we go. Now I'm putting our studs back in. I took these studs out so I could use these bolt locations for the engine stand. Now we can get our clutch disc and pressure plate. When you're installing a clutch disc, if you put it on the wrong way, you cannot drive your car. On most cars, I guess I should say. On this car, it has a direction. This says flywheel side. If I put this clutch disc on and it says flywheel side and it's not towards the flywheel, it will not go into gear. So flywheel text towards the flywheel. I have a clutch alignment tool. This is going to hold it in place in the correct spot while I torque down the pressure plate. So before I get this tight, I want to hold my tool so that it is flat and the pressure plate is in the middle, and then get some bolts started. Now when you're tightening a pressure plate, it is spring loaded, so you want to tighten it down evenly around. Don't tighten one bolt all the way, it'll kind of kink it. Tighten the bolts down in short increments evenly all the way around. Now torque spec is 16 Newton meters, 12 foot-pounds, or I'm gonna do 144 inch-pounds. This is one of those things that since it's spring-loaded, I go around twice. Now your clutch alignment tool should slide in and out really easy. If your clutch alignment tool is pretty hard to slide in and out, it might be out of alignment. You might want to redo it. Zero effort slides in and out, into the splines, and into the pilot bearing on the crankshaft. Now the super fun part. It's gonna feel so good to get this back in. Let's stop wasting time, let's do it. I can't really go back much farther here because we're gonna run into the hood. So I'm gonna lower it a tad, almost past the front core support, not running into the hood yet. Let's go down even more. All right, looking good so far. Gonna have to try to go around the AC compressor line here. Nothing on the other side looking like it's in the way. Just got to get past that AC compressor line. So now it's just playing with the alignment and getting it seated all the way back. Oh, no way. Well, that's not good. All right, well, it's coming back out. The snap ring on the pressure plate came off. That sucks. So the snap ring that holds the throwout bearing to the pressure plate actually popped off. So I'm gonna have to somehow pop this back in. I might have to take the pressure plate back off. I don't know if I can pop this back in, but we're gonna try. Oh, it actually pops in really easy. I definitely could have done that with it in the car, but now we know. Pops out easy, snaps in easy. I could have reached in there and popped that into place. Attempt 2, let's put it in. Also make sure that you have a jack under the transmission so you can move the transmission shaft up and down, because it might not be perfectly aligned until you jack it up a little bit. So you kind of got to line up 3 things at the same time here. You got to line up the 2 transmission studs, and you have to line up the input shaft with the crankshaft. Once you get those 3 things lined up, it should slide back pretty nicely. I think we're getting pretty close here. Oh yeah, nice. All right. I think we can get some bell housing bolts started. The splines are started on the transmission. The studs are almost all the way through. I have 2 bolts started on top. Everything's looking pretty good. So let me get the nuts on the bottom transmission studs. See if I can tighten those up a little bit. Bottom 2 bell housing nuts are tight. Let's get this 3rd one on top tight. Okay, turbo downpipe is on. Okay, I think I can lower this down onto the engine mounts now. Look at that. We're on the engine mounts, we're on the transmission mounts. So with the bell housing bolts tight, the transmission mount is in place and the engine mounts are in place. We can get rid of this massive engine hoist so we have plenty of room to work. Time to tighten up the bolts and nuts for our turbo downpipe here. Got 3 studs with 3 nuts on the bottom and 2 bolts with nuts on top. Okay, turbo downpipe is tight. Next up, we're gonna do our heater core hoses and our cylinder 4 cooling mod. So there's 2 hoses that go to your heater core. Obviously, one goes to and one goes from. Both of the heater core nipples are silver, but one of the nipples on the engine is black. And the hose that goes to the black nipple is the one that gets the cylinder 4 cooling mod. Okay, so heater core hose is on. I hold the cylinder 4 cooling mod hose up to it so I know where it goes. Mark the top of the hose, and now I just pull it right back off. All right, and here's the 2 lines that I need to cut. I'm going to cut on the inside of them just to leave the hose a little long. And now with our hose cut, we can slide the shorter half onto the longer one onto our heater core. Make sure you guys have your clamps on before you do all this, or you'll have to take it all apart. All right, that was easier than I thought it was gonna be, which is super nice. Now we can tighten up all these clamps. Heater core hoses are on. Cylinder 4 cooling mod is on. Now we can slide our starter in from the bottom, and then make sure on this top bell housing bolt that you get this ground attached to it as well. Okay, so power wire, signal wire, ground, and the 2 bolts for the starter. Starter is in. We can tighten up our pitch stop. Again, the engine, transmission, and pitch stop mounts are all Group N. So a solid upgrade over stock. It's not gonna be too rough where it's unenjoyable. All right, so engine's in, downpipe is bolted to the turbo, the cylinder 4 cooling mod is done, the bell housing bolts are in, the starter's in. So I was gonna do a compression test, but there's no point. The compression is gonna change because the rings aren't seated, so there's really no point in doing a compression test right now. We basically still have to do the compression test, but without compression testing. We still need to pull the fuse for the fuel. We still need to keep the spark plugs out. We just need to add oil and crank the engine over a couple times. Make sure oil is circulating before we do our first start. Okay, this is super exciting. We're putting oil in the engine. I am using a break-in oil. So while I'm filling this oil, let's talk about engine break-in. I am not going to do a super in-depth break-in. I think IAG's engine break-in procedure goes through like 8 oil changes. They want you to change the oil after your first start. They want you to change the oil after 50 miles, 100 miles, 250 miles, 500 miles, 750, 1,000, 3,000. It's pretty crazy. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm probably going to run this engine break-in oil for the first start and the first heat cycle, maybe 50 miles, change it to a semi-synthetic for another 300, 250 or something, and then just go to a synthetic normal oil. I think engine break-in is kind of a preference thing. Everyone's got a different opinion. IAG's is super in-depth, but our engine break-in oil is in fact in the engine. And we can go straight over to our fuse box. And if I remember correctly, this 15 amp fuse here is our fuel pump. So now let's put a battery in and use the starter to crank this thing over a couple times. This is super temporary, not even gonna strap down the battery. This is the first time this car is gonna have power in quite some time though. All right, this is a pretty magical moment here. The car's not gonna start. This is just to cycle oil. But if we hear any bad noises, I'll be pretty disappointed. Okay, it's not wanting to turn the engine over. I'm guessing it's because I don't have this one plugged in. That's my guess. With that plugged in, let's see if it'll turn the engine over. Nice. Let me do it one more time. Happy with that. We have cycled it twice. Don't see any oil leaks quite yet. Take this battery out and continue on. Well, while we are right here, let's go ahead and get these fuel lines both replaced and on. If you guys were here when I pulled the engine, I would have shown you that one of these fuel lines has a broken tab. So I just bought a whole assembly here used. There we go. All right, old assembly off. Now we can just slide these on. And we have a whole new assembly, all because one tab was broken. This is the hose I forgot to take off when I was pulling the engine. Did not forget to put it back on though. All right, and that's our fuel line situated. I probably should have waited to do that until I got the secondary air pump on, but it's okay. Okay, now that we cycled the engine, we can put our spark plugs in. We wanted that 0 compression so the starter didn't have to work so hard to cycle the engine. And this should be a lot easier to do since this secondary air pump is not in the way. I might just consider taking the secondary air pump off next time I have to do the spark plugs. I can just reach my whole hand in here now. And that's that side done. I'll do the other side and I'll be right back. All right, spark plugs are tight, coil packs are tight, and the coil packs are plugged in. So let's go ahead and do our secondary air pump, and then we can do our IAG AOS. All right, just kidding. I forgot that the secondary air pump bolts into a bracket that isn't quite here yet. So let's do our AC compressor so we can get that bracket on. So I think it's easier to do our AC compressor by taking off the bracket, bolting it together, and then putting the bracket on the engine. Personal preference though. So I'm going to cover the intake with a towel. Last time I didn't do this and I scratched it up. So this time, cover the intake with the towel, set our AC compressor up here, and now let's unbolt our bracket. And remember, the only reason I put this bracket on before I put the engine in is because we use this loop for the engine hoist. So 4 bolts just for the AC compressor to bolt to the bracket, 2 on top, 2 on bottom. The 2 on bottom also has that separate bracket I just mentioned. All right, now with the AC compressor bolted to the bracket, there's 4 bolts that hold the bracket to the engine. Get them all started before you get them tight. That way everything's in line. And I'm going to start by tightening the one on the front because that's going to push it back, and then we can tighten the other ones. Now since we have the bracket, we can put the secondary air pump in. So the way I took this off, there's only one hose that we need to connect. It's in the back. It's really easy to get to from underneath. Only one wire to plug in, and then 2 bolts on top for the bracket here. And then this wiring can go underneath the AC lines. Okay, it's getting cleaner and cleaner every second. The air oil separator is really like the last unknown thing for me. I have no clue how long that's going to take or how hard it's going to be. So I want to get it done. But if we just put in our power steering pump and our alternator, we'll be looking pretty good. All right, so we can get all our bolts started here. And now this one on the back's the hard one. And now we just got to tighten it all down. And with our power steering pump on, we can just quick plug it in. Now, alternator. Well, gee whiz, I am so sorry I was not recording when I put the alternator on. But it's okay, because it's just an alternator. I'm going to install the AC belt. There we go. And now with the belt over all of the ribs, you can just tighten that bolt back up until we have the tension we want. Okay, and that is all of our accessories on, plugged in. We should be good to go there. Okay, coming together. It's time. I've been avoiding it, but I can avoid it no longer. It's time to do the AOS. Now, obviously, I already have my intercooler off because I never had it on. Next up, they want me to take the throttle body off. Okay, now you put the bottom hoses on. So if you look, the two on the left are 19 inches, and the one on the right is your drain, and that's 26 inches. Now you have a bunch of adjustability for this bracket, but in the picture they show these three locations. So put your bracket on, and then bolt it in place. It's looking like I need to take this sound generator off. So let's do that before I get any farther here. Weight reduction, we'll go faster now. So we're putting the drain to the side, feeding the coolant lines down. Now they give us this little metal bracket here to mount the main harness to, and it just uses the same mounting location that the power steering lines use. So these two hoses are going to be replacing one OEM line. So basically, instead of this hose that goes from the top of the expansion tank to the turbo, it's going to go through the AOS and then to the turbo. So we can simply take off the coolant line that goes to the turbo and cut it just a tad bit shorter. And then they just want you to zip tie these together down here. All right, the next one goes behind the AC lines and to the nipple underneath the throttle body. And then it goes to the top of the AOS. And then we can slide this clamp on. And now we can put our throttle body back on. All right, next up, we're gonna do the drain line. We have some 12-inch heat wrap to protect it from the turbo. And this one's gonna go through the intercooler bracket and to our Y pipe. I'm gonna leave some extra length here so I can zip tie it to the AC line here. Now this clamp isn't gonna fit through the intercooler bracket, so we need to feed the hose through first and then put our clamp on. Next up, we have the hose with the heat shield and the 90 degree. And this is gonna go over the turbo, through the intercooler bracket, and onto the top of that Y PVC breather, and to the bottom of the AOS. All right, now you put the last of your heat shield on the 28-inch line. Route the hose under the coolant lines that you just installed, and route the top alongside the other one right next to the alternator bracket. And this is going to the middle of the AOS. This next hose goes to the front on the valve cover. And then we can zip tie these two together. And next up, the longest one of the bunch goes to the top of the AOS. I'm going to zip tie it to the AC line, and it's going to that same front nipple, but on the driver's side. Okay, and the last two lines, super excited about this. They both go under this coolant line, and the one on the right goes to this PCV hose here, and the one on the left goes to the PCV hose on the front. And a couple more zip ties to finish it off here. Look at that. That looks good. What's really cool about this is that we can delete this black line now. The black hard line that goes over the intercooler, no longer needed. I didn't know how hard the AOS was gonna be, the air oil separator. Not that bad. Let me show you all the routing I did up close. Okay, two coolant lines on the bottom go under the wiring, and then one goes up and into the top. The other one goes down, around, and into the turbo. The drain on the bottom, follow my finger here, goes around to the AC line, through the intercooler bracket, and into the Y fitting. Okay, now we have the lines on the side. The bottom one goes through the intercooler bracket and to the top of that Y fitting. And then the middle one goes also underneath the intercooler bracket and down to the front nipple on the valve cover, while the top one on the side goes all the way over and also down to the front nipple on the valve cover, but the other side. And then this one here goes to the nipple underneath the throttle body, and the two on top are super easy to see. One goes to this PCV, and the other one goes to the PCV by the turbo. Next up, let's get our intercooler on. I got a brand new coupler that goes to the intercooler, and I got a brand new coupler that goes to the turbo. I highly recommend, if you're doing anything with boost, just get T-bolts. They seal so much better than worm gear clamps. If you have boost leaks and you just can't get rid of them, try some T-bolts. All right, got our coupler onto the throttle body. Time to get our intercooler on. Oh God, okay, it's on. Put this radiator in. Oh man, I'm tired. It's like a 12-hour day. I really underestimated how much work this was gonna be. I thought it was gonna be done a long time ago today, but there's 4 things left. Fill the coolant, put the intake on, put the battery on, and flash our Cobb tune. And then we are ready for our first start. I don't wanna be tired for our first start. Also, if I start it, I'm gonna wanna drive it, and it's dark out. And if it's dark out, I can't really film. So, a little bit of patience. We're super close to starting this thing and driving this thing, but I'm gonna be patient and wait for the morning so you guys can come along with me. And good morning. You can see behind me, I've already gotten started before I even said good morning to you, and it's because I'm super excited. I pulled the vacuum on the cooling system and I was checking for leaks. It is going down really slow, but when I put my ear up to the cap or this adapter, it is just leaking from that. So I'm fairly confident that we have no coolant leaks anywhere. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this off and start filling our coolant. Now I'm fully aware that one, I'm supposed to fill it from the expansion tank. I just like filling the radiator first. And I'm fully aware that that vacuum tester is also a vacuum filler. If you can pull a vacuum and use that same tool to fill your coolant, you'll never have any air bubbles. It is the best way to do it. But since we had a little bit of a leak around the cap, I'm just gonna be going old school and using a funnel. The nice thing about these funnels is that you can fill them all the way up to here, and then this becomes the new high point in the cooling system, and it should self-bleed all the bubbles out. Oh, and I did get blue coolant this time. They had green coolant in it last time. I could see residue of green coolant in the overflow, and I was being lazy. In reality, I should have just drained the green coolant from the overflow and filled it with what it should have, but I apparently knew that the engine was gonna blow up. And that drank all of it, and the radiator's basically full. I can see the top. So now we'll just move it up to our expansion tank and fill it from here. I'm gonna put the radiator cap on now. Okay, funnel is about 3/4 full, maybe 2/3 full, and it's not really bleeding any in anymore. And now the next step is something that only people with an IAG AOS are gonna have to do, and there is a bleed screw at the top here. So we're just gonna crack the bleed screw loose. And now it's time for our intake. So we slide this puppy on. Got one bolt that holds it to the chassis. Okay, intake on. Now it's time for our battery, which should always be one of your last steps, which is super exciting because I'm putting it in. And positive first when you're installing, negative second when you're installing, and when you're taking it out, it's negative first, so it's just the opposite. Battery's installed and tight. It ain't going anywhere. Oh guys, it's coming. It's coming up. The last thing we need to do before our first start is flash our Stage 1 Plus Cobb tune. I don't know what tune is on here. I don't trust whatever tune is on here. Oh baby, here we go. I don't know if the car's got to be on or not. I'm sure it'll tell us. Okay, it does say that it wants it in the on position. 2015 WRX STI USDM confirm. A previous tune has been detected and it will be lost forever. So they did have a tune on this vehicle. Don't trust it. So we're gonna overwrite it. And we're looking for Stage 1 Plus SV91 octane. Select. Yes! We're doing it. 10 amp battery charger is recommended. Okay, hold on. I'll hook up a charger. Do what the nice computer says. Okay, charger is hooked up. Turn off headlights. Climate control is off. Okay. It is, it's doing its thing. Do not turn off vehicle or unplug access port. Please turn and leave the ignition in the off position. So it's off, continue. Please turn the ignition to the on position. Car is on, continue. And it's resetting the ECU learning. That's good because we had huge boost leaks, huge vacuum leaks, Installation success. Turn the key to the off position for at least 15 seconds before starting vehicle. And all right, we are flashed. So we're gonna leave it off for 15 seconds. I'm gonna set up the camera. We're gonna do our first start. Oh, that's exciting. Oh God, all right, this is it. I did double check our oil. We have oil. Okay, we have air, we have fuel, and we have spark. I think we have everything for our first start. So let's get our battery charger out of the way here. Here we go. There's nothing left to wait for. We're in neutral. Here we go. Yes, let's go. It sounds good. Oh. Okay, checking for leaks. Oh, it sounds so good. No fuel leaks. There is some coolant under the car, but it's leaking from the cap here. That's why I got the towel on now. Okay, we have a little bit of smoke coming off. Totally normal. I have oil from my hands all over literally everything, and that's just gonna start getting hot and burn off all the hand oils there. No check engine lights. We do have a tire pressure sensor light. That light is on because we got brand new tires and those sensors haven't synced yet. Dude, it sounds good. It sounds healthy. Okay, time to do that bleed screw on the AOS. Okay, coolant's coming out of the bleed screw. We're good there. I took the screw completely out and it started just dumping coolant on the ground. So we're definitely gonna have some coolant underneath the vehicle now. RPMs are coming down. I don't hear any exhaust leaks, no oil leaks, a bunch of coolant. Like I said, I just literally took the bleed screw out and it was just dumping coolant down there. Boys, first start. Oh God, I was so worried for this. I was so worried for this time. It sounds so good. Listen to it. It sounds so good. A little bit of smoke coming off. Hope that's okay. First start, got some oils in there. Coolant temp is coming up. Hopefully we can see that those fans come on and that thermostat opens up. Upper radiator hose is getting warm. Let me check the bottom hose. Bottom hose is still cold, so I don't think that thermostat has opened up yet. Gonna give it a little RPM here. Revs nicely. It's not going any higher than where it's at. All right, let's just turn her off. Well, it's not overheating and it just stayed right in the middle of the coolant gauge, but that bottom radiator hose is not warm, meaning the thermostat did not open. I think we're just gonna continue, go for our first drive, and once we start putting some load on it is when it'll start heating up and we should know if it is gonna open or not. So for the first drive, I'll just really be watching that coolant gauge. All right, before we go for our first drive, I'm just gonna quick zip tie this wheel liner up. It shouldn't look like that. And just like that, we have our fender liner zip tied up out of the way. Won't even see it unless you're literally underneath the car. So we are ready for our first drive. We still have some unknowns that are scary. 1, I don't know if the clutch is good. 2, I don't know if the transmission's good. 3, I don't know if our thermostat is gonna open. All this work, and I don't even know if our transmission's good, is the scariest. All right, let's go for our first drive. How can you hate that? It's so good to get this thing on the road. It sounds so good. It feels so good. The clutch is great. The transmission shifts awesome. It's everything I wanted. I gotta say, it's everything I wanted to get this thing on the road. Brakes work. There's no clunking from the suspension. There's no squeaking from the suspension. It's been 200 miles on this current oil change, and we have about a quart of coolant in the oil. That is a very serious engine problem. So in this episode, we are going to be diagnosing the problem and probably just fixing it all in one episode. I'm hoping, I'm praying that it's a bad head gasket. It's going to be the cheapest fix. It's going to be the quickest fix because I think the other likely options is a cracked block or a cracked head. But there are some simple things that we can do to diagnose it, starting with the IAG AOS in the corner here. I want to assure you guys before I get started that I installed the 2 coolant hoses on this correctly. The two coolant hoses go on the bottom left side of the IAG AOS, right where I'm pointing with my fingers, and one of them goes to the top of the coolant expansion tank. The other one we're not going to be able to see very well, but it goes to the top coolant feed on the turbo. I'm 99% sure that that's not the issue. The other thing it could be is our turbo housing is cracked, letting coolant and oil mix in the turbo. It's important to know that none of the seals inside of the turbo separate coolant and oil. It could only be a crack in the housing letting those two mix, which if you guys remember, I did have to air hammer the exhaust housing off for like 2 hours. So maybe that cracked it, but I'm not really sure how we're gonna test that. What I do know we can do is test our head gasket with a fluid tester. We can also do a lot of extra testing with a cylinder leak down tester. We can test the head gasket, we can test the valves, we can test the piston rings, and we can test for cracks in the cylinder walls as well. And honestly, my personal guess is that we have a crack somewhere. I really hope it's the head gasket. That would be super cool, but I just have a bad feeling that we have a crack. We're gonna test the coolant for exhaust gas, which is kind of redundant because the cylinder leak down test could do the same test. But the reason why I'm doing both is because I need to get the engine up to temp anyway to do the cylinder leak down test. So while it's running, I might as well just do the fluid test for fun anyway. Now the painful part, we need to do the cylinder leak down test when it's warm, which means we have to run the engine. If I was a good person, I would probably change the oil so I'm not lubricating the bearings with coolant while I'm warming it up, but we're gonna send it. So as you can see, it sounds pretty healthy. Also, I'm noticing we do have a little bit of smoke coming out of the exhaust, but it is pretty cold out. So maybe we just do have a head gasket that's bad. Another thing you'll notice is that I have the coolant cap off the expansion tank. That way we're not building pressure in the cooling system. And once we're up to temp, I don't have to release all that pressure, sending coolant everywhere. So right now we're just gonna be patiently waiting for our coolant system to get up to temperature, and then we can do the tests that we need to do. Okay, so we are getting up to running temperature. So I got my head gasket fluid tester all set up, ready to go. We're just going to seal it on the expansion tank here. And then for 1 minute, we're going to squeeze this top valve here. And if this fluid turns colors, we have exhaust gas in our cooling system, meaning we have a bad head gasket. And 1 minute later of squeezing, we have blue fluid, meaning at least our head gasket is not broken and getting exhaust gases into our coolant. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that our head gasket isn't bad. It could just be bad in another spot. Our leak down test is probably gonna tell us the issue better than that fluid tester is. So next up, we're gonna do our cylinder leak down test. The cylinder leak down test is very, very similar to a compression test. We need to get our spark plugs out, and then we're gonna use our air compressor to pressurize our cylinders, and we'll see how much pressure we're putting in versus how much pressure is coming out. And that pressure difference is going to tell us whether we have a very bad leak somewhere. Another thing we can do with that pressurized air is if we do have a bad leak, we can see where the air is going. So if we had bad piston rings, our air would be going into our oil, and you could take out your oil dipstick and hear air coming out. If you had a bad intake valve, you could hear the air going through your PCV system. If you had a bad exhaust valve, you could hear that air escaping out your exhaust. And if you had, let's say, a bad head gasket or a cracked block, you would hear that air escaping out of your cooling system. So again, a cylinder leak down test is very, very similar to a compression test, meaning we have to take off our intake, our battery, and I learned my lesson this time. I'm going to move our secondary air pump so we can take out our coil packs and spark plugs. And way faster than the first time I've done this, spark plugs are out. We're ready for our leak down test. Now, when you're doing a cylinder leak down test, you need to make sure that whatever cylinder you're testing is at top dead center. When you're at top dead center, it makes sure that your valves are fully closed and you don't just let all of the air you're letting in out of the intake or exhaust valves. So the main point is to make sure that your valves are shut. I'm just gonna be using a camera to check if I'm at top dead center. Okay, so now I've verified that I am in fact at top dead center and both of my valves are shut. Now I can go ahead and thread the tester into the spark plug hole. Now before you connect your air, make sure this is all the way loose. Now I don't know if I'm doing this right, but when I turn the pressure up, so now we have 100 PSI going into the leak down tester. And this is only saying that we have 12 PSI on the other side. This is supposed to be up at like 70 to 90, I believe. Well, either we already found the issue or I'm doing this wrong. No air coming out of the coolant, no air coming out of the PCV, and no air coming out of the oil dipstick. I mean, not this much of air, right? So let's try another one, see if I'm doing this wrong. So we're just gonna go right to cylinder 3. So we're gonna lower the pressure back down, disconnect our hose going to the cylinder, and move it over to cylinder 3. But first, we gotta get cylinder 3 to top dead center. Don't forget that. So there we can see that the valve is open. That's exactly why we need to be at top dead center, so that valve's not open. Okay, so now we're turning the engine over while I'm watching the camera here, and there's top dead center. I think the valves were open on cylinder 1 when I was doing the test. I'm noticing I wasn't quite at top dead center, but we're gonna test this one, and then we'll go back and test cylinder 1 again. Let's see if we can get a better result on cylinder 3 here. Okay, yeah, that's what we wanted to see. Okay, we have 0 issue with cylinder 3 here. We're at 100, and this is reading 98. That's like 0 leak down. Actually, we do have some air coming out of our intake, but again, not enough to cause any concern. So cylinder 3, definitely good. Let's go back and test cylinder 1 again. I think one of the valves was open there. Okay, cylinder 1 again, here we go. Okay, there we go. So yeah, I have to be all the way at top dead center. Apparently one of my valves was just slightly open. And look at that, we got the same result as cylinder 3 here. A few PSI difference. Cylinder 3 was at 98 PSI. Cylinder 1 is at 94 PSI. So I just did it wrong. Make sure you're all the way at top dead center. Let's move on to cylinders 2 and 4. Testing cylinder 4. Okay, there's 100 PSI, and we have the same exact result as cylinder 1 at 94 PSI. So cylinder 1, cylinder 4 are 94 PSI. Cylinder 3 all the way up at 98. Let's do cylinder 2. See what we see. All right, what did we think? Are we gonna have issues with cylinder 2? I'm kind of feeling it. I mean, this would be really nice. I'm gonna be honest. If I can see cylinder 2 is the issue, at least I have a path going forward. Okay, well, I mean, that's both good and bad news. All of them are way within spec. I mean, this one's at 96. So they're all within 5 PSI of each other, which is super, super good. And they're all super high. I mean, like this engine, I build flawless engines besides the copious amounts of coolant in the oil. So that was a little disappointing, but the cylinder leak down test confirmed that our intake and our exhaust valves are sealing properly, told me that the piston rings are sealing properly, and it told me that the head gasket is sealing properly. Okay, again, we got to remind ourselves that the problem is coolant getting into the oil, not combustion gases getting into the coolant or the oil. So while the leak down test didn't tell us anything wrong with the sealing of our cylinders, it didn't tell us whether we have an issue of sealing coolant from the oil, which is our problem. So I'm going to take the cylinder leak down test being good as good news because it means, you know, we did something right during the rebuild. I think next up, I'm going to drain the coolant, drain the oil, see if we have any oil in the coolant. If we have coolant in the oil, but no oil in the coolant, I don't know what that'll tell us. It'll tell us something. But I think drain the coolant, drain the oil, and then let's get our turbo off and see what that looks like. Actually, one more thing before I just start digging in. I'm going to pressurize the coolant system, see if that gives me any answers as well. Okay, we're going to sit here at 13 PSI for 15 minutes. You know, now would be a good time to drain the oil while we let this sit here. Okay, let's take a look at our oil here. That is not supposed to be that color. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to see the blue tint on camera, but what I can show you is just look how liquidy this is. This, I mean, like this flows like water more than it flows like oil. We have, like I said, it was only 200 miles and we have a full quart of coolant in this oil, and it just really messes with your viscosity. If I would have drove on this, if I would have not checked our oil and saw coolant in it, we would have been rebuilding the engine again. All right, so drained our oil while the pressure test was going on. So I let this sit here for 20 minutes and we dropped 1 single PSI. So we went from 13 down to 12 PSI in the coolant system. So I don't know why I did that test. We already knew there was a coolant leak. I know it's going into the oil. I know we're not burning it. Just for fun, I guess. But let's drain the coolant now. And now with our pressure tester off, I'm draining our coolant. Instead of taking the lower radiator hose off this time, I just used the drain on the actual radiator. I didn't feel like making a mess this time. Now I know I said let's take our turbo off next, but there is one more thing that's really easy to get to, even easier than the turbo, and that's the oil cooler underneath the car. Okay, so underneath the car here, and here is our oil cooler. I already took the oil filter off to drain the oil, so we should just be able to unbolt this and undo these lines. Shove this towel in there so I don't drip. Now lovely me put these hoses on before I put this on the car, so I did not face these hoses the right way, or I did not face these clamps the right way. Here's one coolant line coming off. Oh Jesus. Oh gee. Ah. Well, that was a cool shot. Hopefully, you guys just got blasted, dude. Jesus Christ! You guys just took the full force of coolant from the engine straight to the camera lens. I don't know if I'm in focus or not. I'm just trying to clean my camera up. Can't tell if it's. Ugh, Jesus. I didn't think there was gonna be that much coolant in there. I might have ruined my camera lens. All right, hold on guys, let me clean up. Okay, good and bad news. Good news is I probably look a little different, and it's because I'm using a different lens. The bad news is my old lens is broken. The other good news is I got our oil cooler off. Bad news is I have no clue how to test if it's bad or not, because you can't really see. I mean, I can't see any cracks on the inside, so probably a waste of time taking this off. It's brand new. I can't imagine it's got a crack from factory. And for funsies, since my camera lens was broken, I took it apart so we could take a look at it. And, you know, here's what the inside of a camera lens looks like. It's not fully disassembled, I don't think. You know, I'm sure there's a lot going on inside here. So here's the damaged lens. This is literally coolant was just pouring right onto this. It's got a lens on the front and a lens on the back, and you can see it's super foggy. So rest in peace, 20mm Tamron lens. You served me well, and now we can tack on $300 to the bill to whatever we find damaged on the car. So anyway, the cooler. I mean, we pressurized the system and we had a little leak, but all I can really think of to test this is if I cover one of the holes and just blow into it, I don't feel the leak. You know, I'm blowing as hard as I can. I don't know what PSI that is. I don't think it's broken. Finally, let's just take off our turbo. So my other camera lens was a wide angle, and this one is a zoom lens, so it might look a little different. I mean, you're way farther back and you're still really zoomed in here. Camera store's closed. Can't go buy my new camera lens. We're stuck with what we got. So, turbo time. Okay. Okay, got the turbo off. Didn't really show you much. You guys have seen me do all of this basically before, so I'm trying to not waste your time, trying to be really quick. I showed you all the diagnosis stuff because that's new. Now I guess we gotta take it apart and look on the inside, huh? All my tools are on my workbench, so I'm gonna work on the nice concrete floor. I'm very unorganized right now. Everything kind of took a spin when I decided to dump coolant on my camera. But we're gonna disassemble this turbo again, and I'm gonna see if I can see any cracks. All right. Yeah, came off much nicer the second time. Happy with that. So yeah, this housing is cracked. But again, exhaust gases go through it, not coolant. But that's just the exhaust housing. The thing that we need to inspect more thoroughly is our actual CHRA central housing rotational assembly. I'm gonna look this over. I'll let you know what I find. All right, boys. I looked at every single part of the turbo that I could see for a good amount of time. And unfortunately, I can't see every part of the turbo. What I can see is no cracks. I can't prove that it's the oil cooler. I can't prove that it's the turbo. I also can't really prove that it's not either of them. So I'm kind of just stuck in this state of can't prove what it isn't and I can't prove what it is. And I'm back. It's actually been 8 days since you guys last saw me. I had my baby boy Cam So the last time you guys saw me was Saturday, and the next day, Sunday, 8:30 in the morning, we went into labor. Finally, a whole 22 hours later on Monday, Cam was born. Everything's been going great. Cam is healthy, my wife is healthy. Of course, I'm healthy too. I didn't have to go through too much besides just a little less sleep. But I'm super excited to be back working on the Subaru. So if this video is a little late, we all know why. Short little recap for me and for you. We tried to diagnose why there's coolant in the oil, and we kind of failed. We took the turbo off, we took the oil cooler off, and we checked the AOS. All of them seem to be okay. Of course, my test is pressurizing it with my lungs, you know, blocking one hole, breathing into the other. And they're not leaking. So next up, it's just time to pull the engine. But there is actually one thing I wanted to show you. The nice thing is about us taking a little 8-day vacation is that the oil in this tub here officially settled, and the coolant is on the bottom and the oil's on top. So let's see what this looks like now. I'm going to pour this out, and hopefully oil on top, coolant on bottom. So oil, and finally changes colors. There is our coolant. So I wanted to let that sit there and settle so you guys could see the difference in, you know, the dark oil. It's been 200 miles on that oil compared to the coolant that's at the bottom. So enough lollygagging, it's time to pull the engine. If you guys are here for an in-depth tutorial on how to pull the engine, how to disassemble the engine, how to rebuild the engine, how to put it back in, how to go for your first drive, check out this 3-hour full build video. I go in-depth on everything. This is just diagnosing why I have coolant in the oil. I'm not gonna go super in-depth. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to it. Pulling this engine is going to be super quick. We just need to take off our radiator, remove our fuel lines, remove our vacuum lines, take off the alternator, the AC, the power steering, and our IAG air oil separator. Then we can remove our starter and the clutch fork. I didn't forget that this time, along with our engine mount, transmission mount, the pitch stop, and finally we can take off the bell housing bolts. And with all of that done, we can put our chains on and pull our engine. We did it! Again, way quicker this time. Probably record pace, don't want to brag about it. Obviously I don't want to leave this hanging here, so we're going to take off the pressure plate and the clutch disc, remove the studs that the bell housing goes into, and then we can get it on our engine stand. Engine's out for the second time. Much easier this time. Learned a lot of lessons last time. Like, don't forget the vacuum line to the booster. Don't forget the clutch pivot arm. And man, it just slides right out. Easy peasy. Another thing I forgot to mention. I was so excited to tell you guys about my new baby boy Cam. I forgot to tell you I'm trying a new microphone setup. I probably sound different now than I did at the beginning of the video. I'm trying a microphone that doesn't clip to my shirt. It just stays on the camera. The microphone I'm trying is the microphone I see every YouTuber use. YouTubers either use an iPhone or they use a camera with the microphone I'm using. Let me know what you guys think, if you like this microphone better or the previous microphone from the beginning of the video. Next up, what we need to do is take off our intake manifold. Now the intake manifold basically takes the entire PCV vacuum line system and all of the wires. So right now I'm just going around the engine, unplugging all of the wires. I'm also going to take off the up pipe just because it'll give us a lot more room to work. And also on the back is our secondary air pump system. There's just 2 hard lines and some brackets holding on the valves. Oh, and of course we can take off the chains that we use to pull the engine as well. And with the intake off, we should be able to leave everything else on except for the timing. So timing cover off, timing belt off, and then valve cover, cams, and heads. Okay, I'm really not excited to take these bolts out. They're notorious for stripping, but here we go. Yeah, it's rounding. Oh God, it's rounding out. This is a snap-on too. Snap-on, Allen key, still not good enough to take these bolts out. They came out last time, got lucky. We're gonna do an experiment here. I'm gonna see if I can remove the cam gear and the camshaft together from the engine. Don't know if it's gonna work. Might be silly, might make things harder, but let's go ahead and take our valve covers off and see if it looks like it'll work. Nope, it will not work. That was a very quick answer. In order to take the camshaft off, we have to take this off, and there's bolts underneath the plastic cover. So we're gonna have to take those cam gears off so we can take off that front timing cover. Now this might be a mistake, but I know this one's already starting to round out, so we're gonna use the big impact on it and see if it helps. That's a big impact. That's a big Milwaukee impact, and it did not even budget. That is crazy. which means we're gonna have to drill these out. Very, very, very not exciting. Yeah, we're 0 for 2. We'll see if the other two want to come out. Yeah, wow. Boys, 0 for 3. We're gonna be drilling these out. Can we get one of them out? What do you think? One of them. Oh, hey. All right, we only got to drill out 3 of them. How exciting. All right, there's one. So you drill the head of the bolt off, and then you can just slide the cam gear off. All of the metal shards are super easy to clean out. It's not gonna get in your oil. They're all sitting right here on the front of the cam gear. Blow it off with the compressed air, and then you'll see your stud here, and it comes off by hand. Literally all the pressure preventing you from untightening these is just the head of the bolt against the cam gear. Again, 27/64 is the side of the drill bit that I'm using. It's slightly smaller than the diameter of the bolt. So you drill through the head of the bolt, and then I just used a hammer and a pry bar, and you break the head off the bolt. You don't want a drill bit that's bigger than the bolt, because then you're gonna drill into your cam gear. Now I got 2 more to do. Okay, I got our last one drilled out here. I just wanted to show you, like, the bolt is still holding on. I drilled through the head of it, and then I'm gonna be careful not to hit the cam gear, but just tap the head of the bolt here. And just like that, head of the bolt off. Now the cam gear slides off nicely. Don't forget to clean the metal out of the inside of the cam gear. And our 4th and final cam gear, 3 out of the 4 spun. So I don't know if that's lucky or unlucky, but they're out. All right, we are super close to taking our heads off now that our cam gears are off. We can take off this cover. And again, I didn't really want to have to do that, but in order to remove our camshafts, these 4 bolts were underneath that rear timing cover, which we couldn't get off unless we broke them off or took off the cam gears. But now we can take off our camshafts. And there we go. This is held on with RTV, so just got to pry it off. Last time I took these buckets out, I didn't really need to. I was just showing you that if you do want to take these out, if you do need to take those out, you should label them. This time I'm not going to be doing that. It's easier to just keep them in the right spot and not taking them out at all. So I think we're ready for the head bolts. Let's take them out. I'm just going to be loosening these outside in, the opposite of the torque sequence, which is inside out. And I'll just be doing them 45 degrees at a time. Okay, cylinders, what is this? This is cylinders 1 and 3. Let's see what we got. Okay, cylinder wall looks really good so far. I mean, they're halfway up, so maybe halfway down it's a little worse, but pretty good there. And it's a brand new head gasket, so I don't really see a leak somewhere here. Let's take the head gasket off. Okay, well, so far, nothing glaring on cylinders 1 and 3. I don't see a crack. The cylinder walls look good. The head gasket didn't look messed up in any way, so let's flip it over and see what 2 and 4 look like. This side doesn't look too much different than the other one. Like, I'm not noticing anything crazy different. So same thing, gonna do like 45 to 90 at a time here on the head bolts, outside in. The head gasket was installed correctly. You know, we got the circle where the other circle is. I mean, it's so new. I don't know if I'd even see anything on a head gasket with 200 miles.
All right, well, I spent a good amount of time looking over the heads and the block and all of the coolant jackets I could see. And again, I still haven't found anything. At this point, I'm pretty convinced that we're gonna have to take the case halves apart again. So let's go ahead and take off our oil pan and see if we see anything there.
Good news is no metal whatsoever in the oil pan, so we haven't really done any damage to the engine. Super good to see that. And this part of the block here, you can see it goes from here all the way over to here. This has coolant running through it, and it is sealed by an O-ring. And when we look back at the footage, we can see I had the O-ring there when I put the case halves together. So this is like our final location where coolant could be getting into the oil.
that we haven't investigated. And I mean, looking at it, I'm not gonna really be able to see if coolant is coming out of there or not. Well, I did some cleaning and organizing of all the parts and tools because the table's back out because I'm gonna split the case halves. I really don't want to. I personally don't think the case halves splitting will solve the issue, but it would be negligent of me to come this far and not. There's one orange O-ring that seals some coolant in. I'm 95% sure it's correct, but if I came this far just to buy new head gaskets and new head bolts, put it back in, and still have the issue, honestly, no matter what I do, it's gonna suck. Let's get it over with. Let's split the case halves. So to split the case halves, we basically have to take everything off. We have engine mounts on the bottom, all of the coolant and vacuum lines on top, all of the timing gears on the front. Then we can unbolt it from the engine stand and put it on our table. Well, actually, I feel a little better now that I've committed this far. Before I took everything off of the case halves or the short block here, I was contemplating putting it back together and just taking a guess that it's the turbo. I probably will just replace the turbo at this point too, because I have that one that a subscriber gave me. We just have to unweld or grind the wastegate to open again, and then we'll use that turbo. I probably should have just started with that to see if that was the issue, but here we are, we're rebuilding the entire engine again. Luckily this time we're gonna have to do a lot less work. Anyway, let's move forward. We need to take off these back covers and the front covers so we can get the wrist pins out of our pistons, and then we can unbolt the case halves and split it apart. Again, this is not a tutorial. I'm just trying to figure out what went wrong. I went through all of this in depth in a previous video. Go check that out if you need some assistance with your build. I do see the irony in me telling you to go follow a build that I'm currently trying to figure out what went wrong with. But by the end of this, you'll know what went wrong. And hopefully after all of this, it was just my turbo. And now that all the wrist pins are out, we can split the case halves. Okay, well here we are. We're all the way down. I mean, here's the O-ring that I was concerned about. It's definitely still here and not pinched, and it was in the right spot. So unless it's just the wrong O-ring, which it fits in the circle and it sticks out past the ledge, still no smoking gun. Who knows, after all of that work, it probably could have just been the turbo. Probably should have just started with that. So after all that, let me take a peek around, let me look around. I really doubt I'm gonna find any cracks at this point, but that's why we're here. I'm gonna look around. All right, let's walk and talk. I don't see any issues. I don't see any issues with the head gasket, the oil cooler, the block, the case halves, the assembly. The only thing that was wrong with the assembly was I torqued the head down incorrectly. But from what I can see on the mating surface of the block and the head is that the head gasket was sealing correctly anyway. So what do you guys think? What do I do? At this point, it's completely disassembled. I don't see any issues. The only thing I can think of personally is just reassembling it with all new gaskets, a new oil cooler again, a new head gasket again, ARP head studs to make sure it seals it really well, and sending it. Or IAG, if you want to help a small channel out, let me know. I would love to work with you guys. On that note, I would love a discussion in the comments. Did I miss something? There's only one thing that I regret not doing, and that's pressurizing the coolant system while I had the oil pan off. I wish I would have did that. I thought about doing it. I didn't do it. I regret it. We have 5 steps that we're gonna take, and one of those 5 steps is gonna fix our problem. Hopefully, because if not, I literally have no idea what the issue could be. Step 1, rebuild the engine. Obviously, we have to do this step. If we do step 1 and there's no coolant leaks, we know I did something wrong in my first engine build that caused the coolant leak. If step 1 does not fix the coolant leak, step 2, replace our turbo. It's possible that our center housing in our turbo has a crack in it, and that's where the coolant is getting into the oil. If step 2 does not fix the coolant leak, then we know it wasn't the engine build, and we know that the turbo wasn't the problem, which would lead us to step 3. Remove the IAG AOS from the coolant system. It is possible that even though the IAG AOS is brand new, that maybe there's a crack in it. If step 3 doesn't fix it, step 4, replace the oil cooler. The oil cooler is actually brand new OEM, so it's unlikely that that has a crack in it,
but it's possible. If we do step 4 and it does not fix our coolant leak, step 5, pull the engine again and replace our heads. Step 5 is kind of what I think is the issue. Step 5 of pulling the engine and replacing the heads, if that does fix the issue, it would mean that we had a crack in our head. Lord have mercy, if I go through these 5 steps and we still have a coolant leak, it probably means there's a crack in the block. It should be really unlikely because the engine block only has 8,000 miles on it. So now you know the game plan. Now you know the 5-step process in fixing this coolant leak. Now you might be saying, why not just do step 5 at the same time as step 1? This way, if we do step 1, separate of step 5, we'll know if it's my engine rebuild that was the issue or a cracked head. So I'm doing this to solve all of our curiosities. So enough dilly-dally, let's get to work.
I'm probably going to say this a couple times this episode, but I go way more in depth on how to build this engine in a previous episode. So if you're looking for an in-depth tutorial, I'll link to that video in the description. The worst part of engine assembly is cleaning everything, especially aluminum. It's super soft, so you have to be gentle or you'll score and gouge the metal and it won't seal properly. I like to clean aluminum with a razor blade to get major chunks of RTV off, then use a soft plastic drill brush and a carbide scraper to get it smooth. And of course, compressed air, brake clean, and a lint-free towel for the last wipe down. Something new I'm trying here is honing my own cylinders. Usually I let the machine shop do this, but it's only been 500 miles, so I see no harm in doing it myself this time. Now we can get ready to make these case halves together. Once you have everything you need ready to go, we can clean one last time, get the main bearings in place and lubed up, then set the 4 O-rings into position. Then we can do the fun part, RTV. RTV goes around the entire top section, the bottom corners, and around all 10 bolt holes in the middle. While I get this RTV spread out, let me tell you how I know how to put this engine together. It's because I'm following the factory service manual. The factory service manual has step-by-step instructions on every single thing that needs to be done. It's got torque specs, torque patterns, where to put RTV, when to lube bolt threads, when to use sealant, all with diagrams and pictures along the way. And because of today's sponsor, eManual Online, you can get the factory service manual for your vehicle 22% off. All you have to do is use the link in the description or scan the QR code and use discount code ShawnzeyRacing at checkout. So go show some love to eManual Online for the discount code and for helping us keep these cars out of the scrapyard. Once you finish up the RTV job, you can lower the crankshaft with the rods already assembled onto the prepped case half, and then lower the other half on top, making sure to seat it in the dowels. Then we can torque them together with long bolts with sealing washers in the middle and the shorter bolts all the way around the edge. Then install the rear main seal. I'm going to be using a lot of Company 23 tools this build, not sponsored, but I highly recommend them because they make everything a lot easier. Now for what I think is the hardest part of this engine build, installing the pistons into the block and getting them attached to the rods. This is my second reminder to go check out my in-depth engine build video because I go over this entire process in a lot more detail with some super helpful visual aids. Make sure you lube up the cylinder walls, the pistons, and the wrist pins too. You want everything well lubricated for the first start. Now we can seal up the block with some plugs with thread sealant, a triangle piece with an O-ring, and a plate with RTV. 2 plugs on the front, 1 plug on the back, triangle with an O-ring on the left, and the plate with RTV on the right. Now we're ready to get this engine on the engine stand instead of this table. First, I like to torque down the flywheel so I don't have to do it later when it's dangling from the engine hoist. I do the clutch and pressure plate now too, but they don't fit on the engine stand. Onto the bottom of the engine, we can install the oil baffle, oil pickup, and the oil pan. Lots of little bolts here, so do not drop them into the engine. Then the oil cooler and the hose that goes to the block. On the front of the engine, we install the oil pump with RTV, Loctite, an O-ring, and lube up everything very nicely. To the right is the water pump, above that is the tensioner bracket, and on the bottom, a hose that goes from the oil cooler to the water pump. On the top is some easier items like a knock sensor, oil pressure switch, crankshaft position sensor, and the crankcase vent tube. Finally, time for the fun stuff. We can clean our head's mating surface one more time, put on the head gasket, and install our ARP head studs. Lube up the head stud threads and the washers to get a super accurate torque reading and torque them down in 3 increments of 30, 60, and 90 foot-pounds. Lube everything up and install the camshafts with the lobes facing up and RTV on the front cam cap. Next, install the camshaft seals on the front. Then for the valve cover, you just need RTV on any part where the elevation changes along with the rubber gasket. Back to the top of the engine, we can install the water pipes, the crankcase vent tubes, and the air pump valves and hardlines. Now we can get our long block in time. We just need to install the back timing covers, the tensioners, the idlers, and all 4 cam gears. This time, I upgraded to the FIC cam gear bolts, so I don't have to drill these out when I inevitably need to replace the cracked heads. And then we can lock down the right side cam gears before we get the timing belt on, and then we double and triple check that all the timing marks line up, pull the pin on the tensioner, remove the cam locking tools, and spin the crankshaft over 2 times to make sure all of the timing marks line up again. If so, you're good to go, and you can put on the cam gear covers and the plastic timing belt covers too, and then torque down the crank pulley. At this point, you have an assembled and timed EJ257 long block, and we can wrap it all up with spark plugs, coil packs, the intake manifold and all of the wiring, the AC bracket for a lift point, the up pipe and turbo, and lastly the engine mount and exhaust manifold on the bottom.
And now we should be ready to put the engine back in the car. I got the chains on the engine, I got the hoist on the chains, I have the throwout bearing on the transmission, I got the car back on jack stands, I have a jack under the transmission to angle it correctly, and I even have all of my parts organized, ready to get put back on afterwards. So now what we need to do is lift up the engine, take it off the stand, then we can put our clutch on and torque that down in a star pattern to 16 Newton meters or 12 foot-pounds. Put the 2 bell housing studs back in the bottom of the engine, and then we just have to nicely meet the transmission and the engine back together, get the bell housing bolt started, and then get it back on the engine mount. From there, we can put our starter back on, making sure to get the ground strap, the power wire, and the signal wire back on. We can put our downpipe back on, our O2 sensor. There's 2 grounds on the bottom of the engine that go from the solenoids to the frame. Then we can put all of our IAG AOS hoses back on, plug in our engine harness, put our throttle body back on, and then our power steering pump, our AC compressor, our alternator, both of the accessory belts, the secondary air pump, the intercooler, the fuel lines, the vacuum lines, the intake, the battery, the radiator. Don't forget to plug in the fans, and then we can fill our oil and fill our coolant. Now a keen eye might notice that the intercooler is back off, and that's because I tried to pull a vacuum on our coolant system and I forgot our heater core hoses. So I had to take the intercooler back off to get our heater core hoses back on. So once I get the heater core hoses back on, I'm gonna pull a vacuum again just to make sure that they're sealed before I put everything back together again. All right, we're at negative 20 kPa, but we're dropping pretty quick here. So I have a leak somewhere. It sounds like it's from our heater core hoses still. Let me get those a little bit tighter. Okay, here's the deal. There is a coolant leak. I have tightened every hose clamp I can see and get to, and it's still leaking. I can hear it leaking from around the water pump area. So even though I know there's a leak somewhere, we're gonna fill it and we're gonna continue. That way when coolant actually starts dripping out, I can confirm where it's coming from. Very annoying, but that's just what it is. So we're gonna fill our coolant before we put our intercooler on, just in case it's such a big leak that it just starts dripping out immediately, and we'll go from there. Now, there's no point in vacuum filling this because there's no vacuum. So I'm just gonna go back old school again and just fill it from the top. All right, well, it's not actively dripping, which is either good or bad, I don't know anymore. So let's put our intercooler back on and start this thing up. All right, well, everything is back together. We have oil, we have coolant. We're technically ready for our first start of this car. I'm just a little less excited than normal because I know there's gonna be a coolant leak. So that kind of sucks. Maybe it'll seal itself, who knows? But I'm gonna try something new. I'm gonna hold down the gas pedal, push the button. Apparently that's supposed to shut off the fuel and let the engine crank over without starting it. I guess we're gonna find out if that's true or not. Okay, again, we don't want it to start. I'm gonna hold the gas pedal down, crank it over, build some oil pressure. All right, perfect. Holding down the gas pedal did in fact prevent it from starting. Now, let's start it. right, sounds healthy. Engine build went well again. Okay, well now the car is misfiring. Didn't have any coolant leaking out yet. So I just reset all of our codes. I'm gonna go drive around, get the car up to temp to see if it starts leaking coolant. And I'm also gonna go drive it around to see if the misfire either goes away or throws a code. So I'll be back. Okay, here's the deal. Drove it 50 miles and we have coolant in the oil. I'm personally not surprised. After the teardown in the last video, we didn't see any evidence of why there would be coolant in the oil from anything I did with the engine build. Obviously, we had to rebuild it again after that. So that second engine build we needed to do because we tore it apart, but it was also a good way to verify to myself and both you guys that our first engine build wasn't full of a bunch of mistakes that would cause coolant ending up in your oil. So again, I was pretty sure that step 1, rebuild our engine a second time, was not going to end up fixing our issue. And that's why I already had steps 2, 3, 4, and 5 laid out. I was already pretty sure step 1 wasn't the issue. Also, if you remember, about 30 seconds ago, when I was vacuum checking the engine, we were losing pressure and we were losing a lot of it pretty quick. Now I know what you're thinking, why didn't you just do that the first time? And I did pressure test it the first time and it held around 10 PSI. Obviously I knew it still had a leak. It wouldn't hold 15 PSI, but I couldn't audibly hear where the leak was coming from. Whereas with this vacuum checker, I can put more pressure in it and I can audibly hear that leak coming from the left side cylinder head. So I know I told you guys that we were gonna do steps 2, 3, and 4 before we did step 5, but I think it's a little silly for me to do steps 2, 3, and 4 when I can hear the leak from the left side cylinder head, and the air oil separator, the turbo, and the oil cooler are all on the other side of the engine. They are not next to the left side cylinder head. The only thing next to the left side cylinder head is the left side cylinder head. I'm pretty convinced that our left side cylinder head is the issue. So we're skipping straight to step 5 and we have to diagnose our left side cylinder head. Have I said left side cylinder head enough for you guys yet? If not, here's one more, left side cylinder head. So I preemptively bought a used left side cylinder head to replace our left side cylinder head. However, I took it to the machine shop this morning and their Subaru expert told me that there is 2 plugs inside of the left side cylinder head that could be causing the issue. So now the machine shop guys got me second guessing on whether it's a crack or those 2 plugs. So before we tear this engine out, just to put a cylinder head on that we don't need, I'm going to drain the oil, drain the coolant, remove our battery, remove our secondary air pump, remove our coil packs, remove our spark plugs, and remove our valve cover. Bada boom! And there's our coolant oil. They're nice. All right, here's the deal. This could be a magical moment for the build here. I'm gonna pull vacuum on the cooling system, and I have a camera looking at those plugs in the head that I showed you on the head that I already bought. And this could save us like $700 to $800 if it's leaking from this one of these 2 plugs. All right, let's pull vacuum. Gotta hook up the air hose first. Now let's pull vacuum. Well, unfortunately, it was not those 2 plugs. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm convinced that we have a cracked head. Could be a cracked block. One of those 2. Current goal is to pull the engine again, pull the head off, and I'm going to take both the used head I just bought and the head that's already on the engine. They're gonna do their own pressure testing, vacuum checking first. Hopefully they can confirm that we have a crack. If they can't confirm it, the used head that I bought needs some work. The bottom is not level. You can see that here. I got a flat bar on it and it wobbles. You can see light in a couple places. The advertisement on eBay said it needs a valve job, but it turns out that the valves are just bent. That's not a valve job, people that I bought this from. A valve job is like cleaning them and lapping them, not just replacing all of the valves because they're bent. Anyway, if our head does have a crack, we're going to deck and clean the new head that I bought, as well as use the valves from this head because they're not bent, and that's gonna save us $160 in valves.
So I can't even get the used head I bought to the machine shop until we take this head off, because we're gonna just make one good head from them. Again, if they pressure test it and there is a crack. It could still be that there's a crack in the block. That's why we're gonna pressure test the existing head first to verify. We did it again and again. This is the third time we pulled this engine. It's getting really easy though, so that's pretty cool. Now we all know what's gonna happen from here. I need to pull the studs from the back and take off the clutch so we can put it on the engine stand. Now, to get our left side cylinder head off, we just need to take off our intake manifold, all of the piping underneath the intake manifold, most of the timing on the front of the engine, and the exhaust manifold on the bottom. Now we actually still have a couple things to do while we wait for the machine shop to give us our good news that hopefully the head is cracked. Now I know that's backwards. Why would you want your head to be cracked? But of course at this point I just want the answer, and I've already spent the money on a used head so we can make one good one. So if they could just tell us our head is cracked, we could all have the answer, be happy, and move on. The two issues we have we can hopefully fix for free. The first one being the rear left ABS wires somehow got cut while the car was sitting still outside. I'm guessing that the little bunny that's been living under there for a week or two decided to chew on some wires. Again, should be a quick and free fix. We simply need to take off our wheel, remove some sheathing to expose some bare wire, crimp the two wires back together, and heat shrink over that. Put a bigger piece of heat shrink over the top, and then I can even be triple safe and wrap that with electrical tape. The second warning light we had was for the secondary air pump system. One of the valves is stuck closed. Now that whole secondary air pump system really just blows unmetered air through the exhaust to trick the O2 sensors into thinking that they're not running rich during cold start. Most people who are modifying their Subaru delete the entire system and then use a tune to turn off the check engine lights. However, I'm not going to be doing that because cleaning the valve should be pretty easy and the rest of the system is working fine. Now there's two valves for the system, one for the left side and one for the right side. Only one of them was giving us an error. However, we're going to open up both of them, give them a good clean, just so we don't have to worry about the other one locking up later. Now just based off of how this one was so much more stuck than this one, I'm going to guess that this one is our stuck one. It's actually super easy to test with two alligator clips and just your battery. We're going to hook up one alligator clip to the left pin, which should be the positive, and the other alligator clip to the right pin, which should be negative. And now we should see this open. And it is not. And just to prove that we're doing that right, the other valve here has 5 pins. The extra 3 pins is for a barometric sensor that's built into this valve. So if your barometric sensor goes out, you have to replace the entire valve, which really increases the price tag of that barometric sensor. So let's test this one out. If we go positive and negative. So you can see this valve is opening and this valve is not. But again, regardless, I'm just going to be cleaning both of them. And then again, we'll test both to make sure they're still operational. I'm just going to be cleaning them with brake clean and a brass brush. Maybe you don't need the brass brush. There is gasket in here. You don't really want to ruin the gasket. So maybe just some brake clean, wipe everything down, and make sure that you at least break the valve loose again so that it's operational. Alright, and after a cleaning, here is the one that was already opening before. Working super strong. And the other side, after cleaning, and I had to kind of help it open a couple times, is opening as well. I will say not quite as strong as the other side, but it does in fact open. And now that both valves are cleaned and operating, we can go ahead and reassemble. All right, here is the deal. It has been 2 weeks
since you last saw me, and we finally got our head back from the machine shop. The machine shop pressure tested the head, and they could not find a leak. However, I did have them make one good head out of the used one that I bought. There's no way I'm going back together with the same head just to have the same issue. So here is the head that originally came off of the engine, and here is our new head that has been cleaned, decked. We took the valves from our head, we took the camshafts from our head because they looked better. I think they also took some of the valve springs, some of the buckets. They just took all of the best parts from our original head and made one even better head. I'm also going to be using all of the original parts from my head, like the solenoids, the sensors. The used head I bought came with all of that, but I know mine are good and working, so I'm just going to be using those. And with all of that assembled, we should be ready to pull vacuum on our cooling system and see if we fixed our leak. We could still have a leak. It could be one of the hoses I just put on. So if we pull vacuum and I double check all my hoses and we still hear that left side cylinder head leaking, it means it wasn't the left side cylinder head and we have an even bigger issue. I don't know how many times I've said this in this video, but pray to the car gods. I have spent so much money and so much time on this Subaru and I just want to enjoy it. So let's pull vacuum and let's see what we got. Okay, it's dropping, but it's dropping way slower and I don't hear it, but we have a leak. Let me find the leak. We are officially holding vacuum. Now, it's time for me to be honest with you. The machine shop tested the head and the machine shop found the crack. I just didn't want to tell you guys until we vacuum tested the entire system and we had no more issues. So it's time to reassemble the rest of the Subaru and time to finally enjoy it. It should be super quick from here. We put on our fuel lines, we put on our vacuum lines, we put on our AC compressor, we put on our alternator, the intercooler, the battery, the intake, fill our oil, fill our coolant. Third first start, coolant's still going, but we're just gonna start it. That can drain while it heats up. Hopefully this sounds okay. It may not be setting any speed records, but the sounds this thing makes are perfect. Even though I've had to pull, disassemble, and rebuild this engine 3 times in 700 miles, hard to hate it. It's fun, sounds good. It's like the perfect manual all-wheel drive daily winter car. We are at 107 miles on our 3rd rebuild. Oil level's good, coolant level's good,
0 check engine lights, which means that I finally get to enjoy this thing. A little bit of deja vu. Obviously, we've been here before, episode 4 when we went for our actual first drive, but that was very short-lived. I slowly watched all of my coolant drain out and my oil level rise until I finally put 2 and 2 together that we had an issue. I hope you guys learned something from this series, because I sure did. For one, if you buy a car and it has an engine failure, and at the same time, the radiator is empty, maybe they're related. Maybe you should pressure test all of your engine components, because maybe there's a reason why the coolant is empty and it has a spun bearing. Another thing is, if you guys thought that this build was crazy, pulling, disassembling, and rebuilding an engine 3 times in 700 miles, you should check out the GR Super build that I'm working on, because the level of difficulty and the level of insanity trumps this in every single way. Frame repair's done, chassis painted, all of the wiring's done. We just get to put it together and hopefully next video, maybe go for that first drive. On that note, I appreciate each and every single one of you. Like, comment, and subscribe, because it helps me more than you know, and I hope to see you in the next one. Now, one more time. God, and the turbo noises. Don't pass up the turbo noises. That's just... All right. One more for the road home.